Greetings, everyone. Greetings from a extremely windy London and a less windy UAE. So today is the second day of our Net Zero virtual conference organised by CIBSE UAE. I'm sure you'll agree that there's a climate emergency going on and buildings have a huge impact. Even a layperson like me knows that much. We had a local perspective yesterday, so we had speakers from the Gulf states and a lot of case studies. But today has a bit more of an international theme. I will welcome Farnaz, who is CIBSE UAE chair, in just a sec, and she will introduce the conference more formally. But I just wanted to run through some conference rules, really. Cameras off. I really must stress that it's extremely important that you have your cameras off, particularly during the panel discussion, because it can be very disruptive. So anyone who does persist with a camera on, it sounds a bit extreme, but you will be booted from the call. You won't be able to unmute. So you can contribute your thoughts in the chat. That's not a problem. If you have questions, they may be tackled and they may be answered, but they may be not. The panel discussion isn't necessarily a Q&A. And one final thing is that please stay for the duration, just as much for your own benefit as for out of respect to our speakers and panelists. And if you have any help, put it in the chat, and myself or one of my colleagues, Jack, will get back to you. So without further interruptions and without further ado, I'm going to introduce Farah.
Thank you, Julian. Warm welcome from CIBSE UAE. This is our first Net Zero conference. I am Farhanaz. I head up the chair of CIBSE UAE. So we would like to welcome each and every one of you on behalf of CIBSE UAE and CIBSE Yen. This conference has took a long time in making. We have been talking about net zero as globally as well as in the industry in UAE for quite a bit of time, and we thought this would be a perfect time after the pandemic and a year after the climate emergency was declared to actually bring in a conference where we have the global as well as the GCC perspective. So it's a two-day conference, and yesterday was extremely stimulating to hear from the local GCC experts on what's happening in UAE and the path and the vision they see towards a net zero decarbonized future for Middle East. Today's panel and speakers, we have brought in experts from UK, USA, and Australia to discuss about the experiences they're having in terms of education, global case studies, and lessons learned. And then we have a panel discussion in the middle of the session where our live speakers will be expressing their views and ideas of what they're doing in their own field. And we are really looking for that moderation, that panel discussion by our CIBSE EN member, Azra Hussain, to get their global perspective and actually open up the conversation about how we can see these lessons learned and case studies and opportunities and challenges and risks from a UAE perspective. We also have our RIBA Gulf Chair, Andrew Shaw, who will be joining us if he hasn't joined yet. And that would be quite an interesting perspective to also see from his experience working in the region, what are the challenges and risks and opportunities we see. Towards the end of this session today, we have case studies from Australia, America, and UK, and we would really appreciate for all of you to stay in towards those case study discussions because they're really amazing information and a lot of wealth of knowledge. Some of those sessions are pre-recorded session because it's middle of the night in Melbourne and USA, but I would really encourage all the participants to put all their questions and thoughts on the chat. If we don't get to answer them during the moderation session, the next few weeks, we will be putting posts out as a post-conference discussion of all and responding to those questions. We also envision to publish a small document at the end of the conference in next few weeks' time, summarizing all the speakers and panelists' discussion, slides, and a short abstract of their presentation. So I really hope that you have a very knowledgeable, stimulating session today. And thank you so much for giving us your time and your energy to be with us. And I hope wherever you're joining from, you and your family are safe. With that, I will hand it to Julian. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. Julian, off to you.
Thank you, Farah. So I'd like to introduce the first speaker. So this is our keynote speaker. It's Victoria Burrows. She represents the World Green Building Council as she directs Advancing Net Zero. Her session will tackle issues related to the climate emergency and look at the global shift towards net zero energy buildings. So please, Victoria, if you're ready, can you start presenting?
I am. Thanks very much, Julian. So hopefully you can see that all okay. And a big thank you to the team at CIBSE UAE for inviting me here today to share a little bit with you about the work of the World Green Building Council as we are advancing net zero towards our global whole life carbon vision. First, a little bit about the World Green Building Council. The World GBC is a global network of national green building councils in around 70 markets across the world, catalyzing the uptake of sustainable buildings for everyone, everywhere. And we're transforming the building and construction sector across 3 strategic impact areas: climate action, health and well-being, and resources and circularity. Through a systems approach, our network and its members is leading the industry towards a net zero carbon, healthy, equitable, and resilient built environment. And why is this important? I mean, you will have heard across the conference already, and no doubt as practitioners in this space, that the built environment has an enormous impact on climate change and on global carbon emissions, especially. We are responsible for around about 28% of global energy-related carbon emissions coming from our building operations. So the energy used to heat, cool, power, and light them. Our global energy consumption has increased over the past 10 years, as has our global floor area we keep building. And with that comes increased energy intensity for space heating, for space cooling, but we are reducing our energy intensity for space heating, showing that we're bringing in more efficient technologies for heating and lighting. And so we desperately need to see those trends elsewhere. And another positive note, renewable energy in buildings is, of course, increasing with more accessibility and affordability of renewable energy technologies. But we're also responsible for significant social, health, and resource consumption challenges. The World Health Organization estimates that around 91% of the world's population live in areas where air pollution levels exceed their limits. The building and construction industry and our demolition waste, particularly in developed countries, contributes to around about 50% of those waste streams, and over a quarter of the world's landfill is made up of construction and demolition waste. And we're responsible for the largest resource footprint. So whilst I'm here today to talk to you mostly about carbon and carbon emissions from our sector, we as an industry, as the design community, have an enormous responsibility to radically reverse these trends, to rethink about how we design, build, operate, and ultimately deconstruct our buildings in order to turn our sector around from being a major contributor to the climate emergency to one that has responded to it. The green building movement rose from the recognition that we have across the world an enormous global building stock that's very diverse, but now is made up of buildings that simply are not fit for purpose in terms of the sorts of performance standards that we know are necessary today. And this led to the rise of the green building movement, especially reaching its peak in around about 2017 with the establishment of so many green building councils and also initiatives like rating tools around the world, and also starting to see some traction in raising the regulatory requirements. However, the recognition of our sector is that green buildings, or doing a little bit less bad, is no longer good enough for the reasons that I've just outlined. And therefore, we need to be targeting net zero operational carbon buildings by 2050 for all buildings and 2030 for new buildings. That represents a big gap in terms of skills, in terms of implementation, in terms of regulation, and the role of the World Green Building Council and our Advancing Net Zero project is to try and bridge that gap. Looking beyond operational carbon, we also have to tackle embodied emissions from our sector in order to achieve total sector decarbonisation. That's another big gap. And then, as I mentioned, considering beyond carbon into how our buildings and our projects can help contribute towards regenerative and resilient cities and healthy communities. And that's why the Advancing Net Zero programme from the World Green Building Council exists. It's a global campaign to accelerate the uptake of net zero carbon buildings to 100% by 2050. We are increasing awareness and education of the urgency and achievability of net zero carbon buildings. We seek to achieve alignment and commonality across different Green Building Council approaches and certification schemes, and to expedite uptake in global markets by sharing market leadership examples at forums such as the one that you're having here today. So as we've heard, and no doubt you're familiar with these numbers, our sector is responsible for around about 38, by recent numbers, percent of energy related emissions. 28% of that is from building operations, and that comes from both the residential and commercial sector, and direct emissions and indirect emissions, meaning that we have a challenge with buildings that exist already that rely on gas or on-site combustion from diesel engines, for example, or even oil, different fuel sources directly from the building, and also our reliance on indirect emissions through the grid. We also have a responsibility for around about 10 or 11% of emissions that come from embodied carbon, from the emissions that go into the production and construction processes through materials and the creation of projects themselves, but also over their lifetime, the maintenance of buildings and renovation and things like that. In addition, we need to consider heavy industry. So the concrete, steel and aluminium sectors are responsible for combined 22.7% of emissions. And that's because, of course, whilst they supply the building and construction industry, there's also a bigger, there's a broader category there called other industry that it also supplies. And therefore, the building and construction sector has an enormous potential here to also, whilst also affecting and reducing the emissions associated with building operations, but also creating the very strong signals to the manufacturers and producers of these products to require lower carbon alternatives so that we can affect a much greater amount of emissions than just the 11% that we're responsible for, which is enormous in itself. So the World Green Building Council has a whole life carbon vision, which is less of a vision these days and more of an obligation. Our sector needs to achieve total decarbonisation by 2050, and that means new buildings, infrastructure and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon, and all buildings, including existing, must operate at net zero carbon. And we also have an interim date for 2030, which is now just 9 short years away, that new buildings, infrastructure and renovations will have at least 40% less embodied carbon, with significant upfront carbon reduction, and all new buildings must be net zero operational carbon. And that, of course, gives recognition to the fact that we're going to build more buildings between now and 2060, and those not built to those standards are going to need renovation. In fact, we're expecting to double the world's building stock in the next 40 years, but also the increased opportunity to influence design performance of buildings and material selection in new projects. We must be building to these high performance standards today. Projects being completed in 2030 might be in the planning stages now, and that means we need to know how to build these, design and operate these high performance buildings today. So within our framework, we set out an umbrella definition for what we mean by net zero operational carbon and also embodied carbon, and a series of guiding principles that promote best practice in their implementation. So for example, when we're talking about net zero operational carbon, we do mean in operation. We mean based on how the building's actually being used, not just how it was designed to perform, looking at closing that performance gap. We're also focusing on carbon emissions. So yes, energy consumption is important. We're interested in how much energy is being used, but where is that energy coming from? How is it being generated? And also that reducing energy wastage and energy demand is important for other reasons like comfort, but also to make sure that we're not unnecessarily generating energy that could be used elsewhere. And then similarly for embodied carbon, a hierarchical prioritization structure is followed, preventing the use of embodied carbon at all, or the generation of embodied carbon at all, by promoting or prioritizing the renovation of existing buildings over building new, selecting different materials that have reduced carbon footprint, and optimizing buildings for adaptation in the future and deconstruction instead of demolition to promote circular economy practices. And across both of these concepts, we recognize the role of offsets in some markets as necessary as part of this transition, but something that shouldn't be relied on too heavily for a net zero future. And so therefore, that's why this demand reduction strategy is so important. Around the world, our green building councils are taking that framework and applying it in a way that is relevant to their particular markets and context. For some, that might mean starting on a focus on operational energy or operational carbon, depending on the different regulatory frameworks and sort of market socialization to these concepts. And in others, they might be starting immediately with a whole life carbon approach, such as in the UK Green Building Council with their framework. DGMB from Germany has a climate positive strategy for certifying buildings. And then also within the Emirates, so you would have heard yesterday from our colleagues in the Emirates Green Building Council about the option for certifying via ILFI through the Emirates GBC, and also from the US Green Building Council, there is LEED Zero. And all of these programs and initiatives sit under the Advancing Net Zero project. They follow that framework, which means they're all leading towards net zero in a very similar way, and zero means zero across all of these schemes. You might be familiar with some of the different certification schemes and the different performance requirements and criteria. Some of them are quite prescriptive. And in this case, it's very much performance-based, and zero means zero, no matter where you're certifying. Now, that is important because the initiatives, the programs, the green building rating tools, all the different frameworks from green building councils represent voluntary action that exceeds the requirements of local regulation and code. And that helps us demonstrate the industry knowledge and readiness to deliver these high performance buildings beyond what might be required within those policies. And so companies or business action that sets ambitious science-based targets that sort of demonstrate what's possible by creating pilot projects or building to net zero way ahead of regulation requirements helps create the confidence in governments to implement bolder and more ambitious climate policy, maybe starting with a roadmap and setting those sort of clear and ambitious targets and policies for a predictable regulatory environment. That in turn creates more confidence in businesses to make the necessary investment and growth strategies aligned with a zero carbon future. Maybe that investment in the production of net zero steel, like I was mentioning earlier, they need to see those strong demand signals in order to make those investments, which in turn helps create more confidence in governments to roll out regulation and bring these solutions to mainstream. And we call that the ambition loop. This problem is too big a challenge to be solved purely by regulation alone or purely by business climate action, and we cannot rely on each other to do it for us. And we have to be taking that forward in our day-to-day work. So we publish a status report each year, the Advancing Net Zero Status Report, in which we highlight some global trends that we're seeing, some stories and case studies, examples of projects that are moving towards net zero, policies that are being implemented in line with our vision, and really help kind of celebrate the progress that we're making towards our vision. And what we're seeing at the moment is an influx of tools and resources in the market that help you design net zero buildings, which is what we need to see, including the sorts of tools that can help you predict how a building will perform, not just when it's built, but over its lifetime. And also tools that are helping to calculate the embodied carbon of different building types, different masses, different material options, for example. The concepts of energy and carbon budgeting that are just as important as a financial budget these days, that are showing that decisions and evaluations on a project or a master plan will be based on how much of its energy or carbon budget it's using, not just how much did it cost. That these sorts of high performance targets rely on extensive collaboration and integration of all the different disciplines across a design community. Again, it's not the responsibility of just the architect or just the engineer to achieve a net zero building. It has to work all the way across that value chain. Unfortunately, there's no single solution for net zero. The case studies that you'll hear about as part of this conference and elsewhere, they'll all have a slightly different strategy to achieving net zero, and the end goal is what's important. But it does mean that net zero can take many forms. It's got to be a bespoke roadmap, depending on whether you're applying it at a building level or an entire organizational level to reach net zero. But there are so many different solutions and approaches out there that it does allow you some flexibility in delivering it in different markets. We're seeing lots of organizations committing to take action. Committing to net zero is one thing, actually designing and delivering a net zero building is another, and that's a really promising trend from the market as people begin to recognize the broader value proposition that net zero buildings offer, not just based on a business case, solely based on CapEx and OpEx, but one that considers future risk mitigation, the benefits to the buildings and its occupants, and frankly, the risk of not taking action towards high performance buildings for the future. The good news is that net zero is here. We are seeing net zero buildings all over the world in different climates, in different building typologies. The solutions exist, the technologies are available in the market. The industry has the knowledge on how to build net zero buildings and design them. That is not our barrier here. So we're seeing here, there's mosques in Jordan, net zero energy mosques. In the top right there is Barangaroo, which is a high density mixed use development in Sydney, which relies on a very high performance building envelope, on-site renewable energy on all available roof space, and then buying renewable energy from off-site sources as well. Bottom left is affordable housing in Hawaii, which goes to show that through a really solid strategy towards net zero, the house can be affordable to construct, but also affordable to operate. And then the bottom right there is Mineira Stadium in Brazil, which is net positive. It generates far more energy than it needs. In fact, it only needs 10% of the energy generated by those solar panels that have been retrofit onto its roof. And the remaining energy is shared amongst the community, around 200 homes in the vicinity. There's loads more case studies like those available on our website. You can take a look by different performance standards and find out more about the sorts of solutions that have driven them to achieve those performance standards of net zero. But we need to be moving faster, and the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment is an initiative from the World Green Building Council that currently has 132 signatories across businesses, cities, states and regions that are committed to going further, faster and achieve those targets that we set out within the vision statement across their own portfolio sooner. But in terms of cities or states and regions, actually implement regulation to achieve our vision, because we need to be taking action at scale. We've proven it's possible, and now it's time to ramp up those solutions. And you can find lots more about this on our website. So finally, our theory of change is that through radical collaboration across all disciplines throughout our sector, towards a common vision, both at an asset level, but also industry-wide? Can you guarantee or can you justify why a project that you're working on is choosing not to be net zero in this current climate emergency? Through enhanced communication, raising awareness and building industry capacity and improving education through addressing foundational gaps in skills, data and benchmarks through both the design options, but also the implementation on site of some of these strategies. We also, of course, need to be addressing our existing buildings and ensuring that the opportunities for retrofit are understood and capitalized on. Creating new and innovative business models, new technologies and circular patterns that help us drive towards a net zero economy, and ultimately mandating reductions in both operational and embodied carbon that are aligned with a 1.5 degree compliant decarbonisation pathway via regulation. And we believe that through combining all of those different considerations, we will accelerate towards a net zero future and harness the power of voluntary, financial, policy and regulatory market forces. And I'd like to invite you to hear much more about some of the content specifically from Middle East and Africa in our Green Building Congress, which is coming to you on the 22nd and 23rd of March, where you can hear all about strategies towards net zero buildings, healthy and resilient buildings across those 2 days of content. Please visit worldgbc.org to find out more and register for the conference. And I hope to see many of you there. And I look forward to the panel discussion shortly afterwards. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julian.
Lovely, Victoria. Thanks very much. Fantastic presentation. That was Victoria Burrows, our keynote speaker. I'm sure we can all agree that doing a little is no longer enough and drastic actions need to be taken towards total decarbonisation. Next, I'd like to introduce Din Chatic. I hope I've said that correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong, Din. He is an associate at the Carbon Trust, and he will present on how Carbon Trust is working with global companies across various sectors to achieve net zero targets. So could you please start sharing your presentation, Din?
Yes, just a moment.
And just to guess, please turn off your cameras. Mohammed Ashraful Alam, sorry. Sorry to name and shame.
Okay. Does that come through on your end?
Yeah, that's great.
Perfect. All right. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone on the call. And thank you to the CIBSE UAE for inviting me to present. My topic today will be basically covering how clarity is key to achieving long-term sustainability goals, such as the one we are talking about today on net zero. And I'm pleased to share some of our knowledge and experience with implementing net zero across different organizations and value chains. So just a brief overview of the agenda for the presentation. We will look over some context, so where this is, how this has developed over the last few years. Then one of the most important, I think, point in this whole domain is having a clear understanding of the definitions. And then I'll then be providing on some context on actions that companies are taking to adapt to net zero. So just an introduction to the Carbon Trust. It is a sustainability consultancy that's been around since 2000. That's been formed in 2001. It used to be part of the UK government and then became independent around 2010. And our mission is to accelerate the move to a low carbon economy. And we work across businesses, governments, cities, regions, all kinds of various businesses of all sizes as well. across the globe in order to reduce emissions and achieve greater resource efficiency. And so my team specifically, which I sit on, is the business services team, and we provide independent expert assurance that recognizes genuine environmental achievement based on 20 years of understanding the impacts of organizations, products, and services. So just a quick overview of our locations. So we're spread across various continents from the Americas. We have a new base in Europe, in Amsterdam. Our headquarters is in London, and we have offices across the UK. And we also have offices in South Africa, Singapore, and in Beijing. So a bit of background on how businesses have been developing their climate goals in alignment with COP21. So basically, this has come from the COP21 conference of the parties, which is the UN climate change conference that was held in 2015 in Paris. And so that happened 6 years ago. And so world leaders came together to sign the Paris Agreement, and they made a commitment to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So basically then this has been an ongoing conference. As we know, COP26 was scheduled to be held last year in the UK, but due to the COVID pandemic, it had to be rescheduled to 2021. But basically it all stems from the fact that the parties, so the different countries that were participating, reached a landmark agreement to combat climate change and to accelerate and intensify actions and their investments needed to create a sustainable low carbon future. And so through that, there have been various targets that have been set, and one organization is called the Science-Based Targets Initiative, so the SBTI, and it's an organization that was founded in 2015, so around the time of the COP21, which was a partnership between the CDP, the UN Global Compact, the World Resources Institute, and the World Wildlife Fund for nature. And then there's been quite a large uptake of corporate climate ambition. As you see on the chart on the left, just in the last year, there've been almost a doubling of the companies setting targets, and also then committing to setting targets. And on the right, you can see the breakdown of the difference in the level of ambition. So you have aligned to a 1.5 degree pathway, a well below 2 degree Celsius pathway, or a 2 degree Celsius pathway. So the lower the goal is to come towards a 1.5 degree pathway, and that's what most companies are striving towards. So there have been a number of significant developments in the area of net zero over recent years, with many aspects really just still evolving. There's been basically back in 2010, the British Standards Institute launched the first carbon neutral standard. And this is also one term that I'll come on to later in the presentation, which is quite often used when people say net zero, or they say net zero when they're actually carbon neutral. So that's something to keep in mind. But going forward, as I mentioned, the Paris Agreement in 2015, and then the Science-Based Targets Initiative was launched. And there have been, a steady uptake of companies aligning to science-based targets, but there's also been a big development of a standardized framework in terms of launching a appropriate definition. And so this year, the Science-Based Targets Initiative is launching a consultation with various companies in order to derive at a proper net zero definition for the corporate sector. So one thing you've seen, and we've all seen across various news sources, that there have been many companies and countries increasing in their communication of carbon neutrality and net zero commitments over the last few years. So we'll now take a deep dive into what carbon neutrality and a net zero roadmap looks like for business today.
5 minutes, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Julian. So some background on how businesses have been developing their climate goals, but also a few definitions to put into place. So carbon neutrality is basically when the carbon footprint of an entity has been reduced and any outstanding emissions are offset with high quality offsets. So the key point is that carbon neutrality is something that is achievable today, but that is a more short-term ambition. And if we move forward to the net zero topic, so the science of net zero is quite simple. It basically means that every sector in every country needs to be on average zero emissions. And that's something we have a good understanding of across electricity, cars, buildings, and even a lot of heavy industry. Of course, as we're talking about on the conference here with the built environment. But in certain areas like air travel and agriculture, there is currently no prospect of getting to net zero in the near future without some radical changes in production or in our day-to-day lives. So for these residual emissions, greenhouse gases will then be needed to sort of taken out of the atmosphere at the same rate as they're added, so that on average there are net zero emissions. And a few further definitions to be aware of that have been mentioned as well. Carbon negative is basically when the greenhouse gas removals are greater than a company's emissions, so that it removes more carbon than it emits each year. And one example is from Microsoft, who've set a pathway to being carbon negative by 2030. And then there's also zero carbon, which is basically meaning that a company achieves zero emissions without needing to undertake any carbon removals. So just a quick overview of the difference. So some of the reductions that are necessary in carbon neutrality is not actually specified, but for the net zero ambition, it's to be aligned to a 1.5 degree science-based trajectory. And I'll go forward on to some of the steps that can be taken as well. So just a quick case study of a company that we work with is Danone, and specifically their bottled water company Volvic, who are now certified as carbon neutral. And this has been done through measuring the footprint, then offsetting it, and then also working year on year to reduce its carbon emissions by such as switching to 100% renewable energy, and then looking at packaging commitments as well to drive down the product neutrality. So how can these be translated into definitions? How can the definitions be translated into practical actions? So firstly, it would be to calculate a baseline footprint, to work. Basically, if a company wants to set a science-based target or be net zero, they would have to calculate a scope 1, 2, and 3 baseline. And to give a little bit of context about where this comes from, the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are as defined in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. As scope 1 is anything within your own operations, so things that like on your company facilities, your company vehicles, and scope 2 is your purchased electricity, heating and steam, heating and cooling, and that's sort of indirect, but you're purchasing it for your operations, which is a necessity for all companies. And scope 3 you see on the left and right is anything that's going upstream into your company to produce your product or service, and then downstream when it goes to your consumers or in the end of life of the products. So once this has been calculated, a company can then set a science-based target, and it would look at basically what are your what's your current baseline, and then how you would have to decarbonize year on year in order to achieve a net zero goal by whichever year, depending on your sector and the size of company. So just to touch on the different emissions and some of the different strategies that can be implemented. So across purchase electricity, looking at energy efficiency on site, and then moving to renewable energies. In transportation, moving to electric fleet, for instance. These are more easy, sort of straightforward to manage and measure, but looking forward into the scope 3 emissions, that is a bit harder to decarbonize. So looking into that, some of the top things that companies have a good awareness of is how much they're purchasing in their goods and services. And so it could be a solution could be to implement a better product design. We talked about circular economy models earlier as well. And then also with regards to business travel, that tends to be quite a large source of emissions for service-based companies. So that's something.
Now, please?
Apologies. Yeah. So I'll just skip forward to the end. So basically the journey to net zero, to measure baseline footprint, to align your science-based targets to a 1.5 degree pathway, then to define and implement your decarbonization strategy, and then to really be clear and transparent with your communication. So really knowing what's included and what definition you're working towards. So yeah, in order to avoid any form of greenwashing that can come about. So yeah, that's all. Apologies for going over time, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Ian. Sorry to interrupt you there. That was a fantastic presentation, a very clear roadmap of how to achieve net zero and how to calculate science-based targets and implement a clear strategy. So that was very useful. Next, we have Dr. Motaz Hussain. He's a lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University. He'll be presenting on the role of academia and embracing the impacts and action towards climate change and net zero development. So if you're...
Yes. Can you see it clearly?
Yeah, that's great.
Great, thank you, thanks. Okay, welcome to Net Zero Conference for my presentation, and the topic of my presentation is the role of academia embracing the impacts and action towards climate change and net zero development. So I'm a lecturer in environmental architecture and technology from Sheffield Hallam University, but also I'm a visiting lecturer from University of Westminster in London and University of Nottingham. So the presentation structure is very simple three structure. Basically, I want to ask some key questions to myself and of course to us. And that question is also revolving to the role of academia, my interpretation, some answers that I feel from my experience, over 13 years of teaching experience so far globally, including UK. And also I will try just to share some example from my experience so that maybe some of them we are working on and something we need to work for to make sure we can develop further. So that's my presentation structure. The key question I want to ask in terms of the role of academia embracing the impacts and action towards the climate change and net zero development. So there's some broad aspects, some curriculum aspect, and the pedagogical aspect as well. So the first question I would ask, to what extent does this have an impact on architecture education and design profession. I'm an architect, so I'm focusing on more architecture part and design profession, but also about what, in terms of curriculum, what are the impacts on the academic curriculum, and what would be the key impacts on the delivery of this academic curriculum to the students or future generation. So first of all, the impact of climate emergency on architecture education and design professionals, the way I see so far, has to be more sustainably focused, carbon neutral future. It has to be raising awareness in education. There will be a paradigm shift of behavior, and that needed for net zero future is including students, practitioners, and clients. So basically, clients also has to have a mindset towards that. Otherwise, no point to do that. Regenerative design practice, so that could be more implementation very quickly and more so that is more easy to build, and also to reduce the carbon footprint as well for net zero future. Climate mitigation principles to be adopted, the existing and new built environments. So we have to think about the existing buildings and new buildings to make sure they are also carbon neutral. Most important, the importance of the course curriculum towards net zero development and preparing our future generation to be leaders in climate emergency. So my observation or my interpretation of rethinking the contents and the role of academia in that is that it has to be environmental design, integrate environmental design within the curriculum. That should include more qualitative and quantitative aspect. Some technical modules should be included if there's not any scientific, ecological, and multidisciplinary. Module integration is very important, and also the criteria should be met and designed such a way. For example, RIBA criteria as well should be focused on net zero future as well. And that could be integrated in various levels, in foundation course level, undergraduate course level, postgraduate course level. And I'm talking about not only in the UK, but also all other across the world. And for example, in undergraduate sustainability focus should be undergraduate study should be more sustainability focused, design studios and technical modules should be there to support that. But also in postgraduate, probably more advanced technologies like life cycle analysis or zero plus energy buildings, etc. So this should be integrated. Other things in the content should be integrated to field evidence and reliability on digital simulation tools. You all probably, some of you know that RIBA, the design awards need to have all the integration of the field evidence, field data, one year to be eligible for an award. So that's also important to be in the curriculum aspect from the very beginning. Construction and renewable energy technology should be there, and online learning syllabus should be there as well. That includes the containment technologies. It's important to think about the delivery of these contents, and that's include the scientific approach should be adapted to a creative design without compromising the poetics, by the way. So we don't compromising the poetics of architecture, but also but scientific approach should be integrated. The evidence-informed approach should be adopted when delivering, adopting smart technologies during teaching delivery. Degree apprenticeship, that is very important for the existing practitioner who probably don't have the knowledge for the zero energy future, and probably they need some technical knowledge, and that could be a part of the delivery of course. Prototyping and testing, webinars, more virtual collaboration. For example, we are having this online seminar conferences that involve more collaboration, and global awareness could be built through that as well. So that's very important. And also online learning syllabus could be adopted for delivery so that globally it can be spread away. So let's give you some examples so that we have so that we can see some content, what it may look like. And so far, I was working on it at least. Is that we all know that we always design our building for climate responsive, but we need to think about the contemporary environmental technologies that involve the integration of science and technologies, evidence-informed approach. For example, this building in the right-hand side, you see a picture, but if you have a thermal imaging camera, that give a different story, right? So this is something you need to adopt from the very beginning, more scientific, so that we also think about the net zero future and the carbon footprint of the building and performance from the very beginning of the study. So, for example, course curriculum so far I was working on in different universities I already mentioned is focused on the integration of how the environmental performance of light, heat, and sound. And air includes air velocity, ventilation, air pollution, whereas heat involves the thermal comfort, etc. This is something basic thing we do in the undergraduate studies in environmental architecture or environmental design courses in the University of Westminster or Sheffield Hallam or so many other universities as well, as far I know. So for example, for content delivery, integration of digital technology means not only for digital technologies, but also to involve students to test the models using heliodon, for example, and using the sun roses to make sure that they can learn practically what's the impact of sun in different regions of the world. It's also important to adapt with the context, and we also teach students how to cope with the extreme climate scenarios in the future and how the building skin should be developed that way in different climatic contexts. And that we should always do. And for example, one of the examples we do is that to learn about from the past, learn about the clothing of a certain climate and how they have a similarity within the building climate screen. So for example, insulation and building insulation kind of similar to make people comfortable, and how that can be built and this awareness usually developed through that. Also important to teach students from the very beginning, even in the undergraduate student, to use the scientific technologies. For example, in the picture in the left-hand above left top side is a air pollution meter I used before, which shows you the air pollution, continuous air pollution while you using this or traveling. And these kind of things are really important to make students aware of and future generations so that they have evidence. It's not like we're just talking. We have the evidence to see that what is actually happening and how to reduce them. But also you cannot always do the physical modeling, so we have to build on the reliable simulation tools that we can rely on. This is also part of the process. One of the examples I want to show just very quickly before I finish is that I have run a collaborative research and also learning experience. So students have to involve in research where we are using IoT and real-time data visualization so that students understand how changing a opening window changes the comfort level and how the real-time temperature experience or temperatures have an experience on the human body. And this kind of integrated approaches, research and learning experience students should have it so that they are more aware of this from the very beginning. This is some of the two examples that I involve in modules in Sheffield Hallam University, for example, in environmental technology modules, where we build these students to get involved in this kind of environmental technologies, where the first year they learn about the basic calculations, second year try to understand the modeling and some few simulation tools, and the third year they actually apply the simulation tool in greater extent to make sure they have more environmental performance, and of course Design Studio also designed that way that we try to design off-grid design. This is my last slide, so I'm almost on time hopefully. So is that we also in the Sheffield Westminster, for example, I was involved in the project design project in the final year where students are doing off-grid design. So from the macro scale to micro scale and to prototype, they actually do all the process through scientific evidence, so using simulation and also some scientific data. So this is something we also look forward to. Maybe we can build more this kind of curriculum design, so make student future generation to prepare for the net zero future. Thank you for your attention, and thanks for joining with me as well.
Thank you, Motaz. Thank you for that perspective from academia and how academia is leading the fight against net zero. So next up, we have Dr. Andy Ford, an academic also. He represents London South Bank University and he's Professor of Building Systems Engineering. and he's going to be speaking on the work done so far by the UK, CIBSE and other bodies on the climate emergency and net zero projects. I can see he's got his presentation ready.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be with you in just a second. Hello.
Okay, no, take your time. Not too much time.
It's not too much time, thank you. Okay. Right, are we on yet? Okay, so
it's still on. Oh, there we go. There's full screen.
Got there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it a full show yet? I can't see it.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me to come and talk. I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about what's going on in the UK, and eventually from the university's perspective. So maybe I'll start with a little bit of explanation about who Andy Ford is. I am an engineer, obviously, but I have spent 35 years running consulting engineering practices before I sold it, and then moved on to academia at the ancient age of 60 and became a professor, and spent a lot of time now learning what that means. So my talk is going to be a scan through what's happening in the UK, mostly at structural level, and then maybe one example of what's going on at the university level. So first off, I want to talk about the way that the UK has established an industrial strategy. And most importantly, that part of that industrial strategy is clean growth. Now, we haven't had a strategy for ages and ages in the UK, but this is 2017 and it's been confirmed it continues onwards, the same strategy, which is nice to see, because the problem I have with a lot of what happens at governmental level is it fluctuates rather a lot, up and down, and sometimes it comes and goes in a year or two. But this is ongoing. It's clean growth, and the two places that I think are great relevance are Innovate UK. So those of you who have not come across Innovate UK is where you might go for funding if you want to do something interesting that matches the industrial strategy. So if you're an organization, an SME or a large organization, you can get funding to do something that you could not otherwise do within your organization and move things forward. To help you understand who you might be working with, you might also engage with something called a knowledge transfer network. That's a KTN. And there is one that deals specifically with the built environment. They've all been brought together, and so have the university funding, research funding organisations. They've all been brought together under Innovate UK. So now universities and industry are measured to see how well they're working together. It's really important for a university now to work with industrial partners, because they are measured according to impact. And impact means what real change did they make in society. So it's no longer things that just end up on a shelf or just talk to each other. It's now what makes the difference. So what else is going on in the UK? Well, this is possibly the one that I find most exciting. The sector itself appears to be getting its act together. So collaboration, as has been said by others, is essential if you want to actually make progress in this way. If we're going to get to zero carbon, we are going to need to work together, because we're not talking about just designing a building. We're talking about making sure it operates forever and is zero carbon forever, is built well. So that means that the organizations such as CIBSE, which we're members of, need to get their act together. So they have done so, and they've called themselves Actuate UK, literally only been launched in February. So give them a chance. It's the sum of the leading trade, technology and professional bodies. They've been brought together, and together they wish to use this alliance to bring a consolidated voice to others, to the government, to something called the Construction Leadership Council, which I don't know what any of you have come across but is supposed to be the UK government's attempt to get the construction industry talk with one voice. It doesn't talk with one voice at the moment. It's getting there, and Actuate UK is a very exciting move towards something along the right lines. So it's going to do.
Andy Farah here. The slides are not changing.
Are they not?
No.
Hell, thank you for telling me that. That's really important.
Yeah, we are still on the first cover slide.
Hold on. In that case, I'm on slide 3 and nobody's noticed. Right, hold on. Is this going to help? Let me catch up. That was the first one.
Okay, thank you.
That's the next one. That's the way we were. So apologies to everybody, and thank you, Farah, for telling me just now, because otherwise you would get very bored in very no time at all. So what's Actuate UK going to do? It's supposed to deliver a single expert trusted voice on behalf of UK engineering services. That's across the profession and across delivery and all the way, everybody, all a single voice. And CIBSE are very keen that they are playing a positive role in that. So it's going to work closely with industrial partners, policymakers and other stakeholders, and they're aiming to help us get to net zero. Meanwhile, what else is going on? Well, this is the other thing that's going on. There is a cross-industry action group initiative, which is called the Climate Framework, and they're trying to pull together what should be taught to who, when, because we're not talking about just teaching new students. We're talking about teaching people who are in different parts of our industry and have been there for a very long time. So all the way up to people at my age. So it's fine if you come in recently, you come through a university, you'll understand sustainability, you'll understand carbon. That's not necessarily true throughout the supply chain. So we need to get the appropriate level of education to everybody across the age group, across the entire supply chain. And this is an effort by a cross-industry group helped by the Construction Industry Council to try and put together suitable curriculum. And it's underway. It's not finished, but it's underway, and I'm sure they would love to have others collaborate with them. Meanwhile, at my university, and my university is quite key to the building services sector, because we teach something like 60% of all the building services engineers that get launched into the UK market. They have joined together with BISRIA, Building Services Research Organisation, Industrial Building Services Resource Organisation, to actually work together as an innovation centre. Because what's needed now is an acceleration of how research goes into practice and how what happens in practice goes back to universities, and the whole loop needs to be accelerated. And that can only happen through a collaborative approach. So I was really pleased to see that the building services sector and the South Bank University, which have worked together informally for a long time, are now actually formally getting their act together to put proposals to work with industrials to see what can be done faster. Meanwhile, since I moved to the university, I'm not sure whether I've been welcomed all the places, because I've dug up half the university campus. I believe that when you do something as an engineer, you need to do it for real, and you need to prove that it works for real. One of the largest challenges facing the UK is our existing building stock, and that's true of large sectors of the world. it's more problematic than the new build. We're rather relying on our students that are coming through from building services and architecture right now to move on and make sure that the new build are in fact zero carbon. But our existing stock is a big challenge. So our focus has been on heating and cooling research and how to integrate buildings into the energy supply system, how to become part of the demand side response. This is one of our most exciting ones. This is the one I've been doing. It's called the Balanced Energy Network. It brought together 8 organizations who looked at everything from thermal storage to developing new heat pumps, installing an ambient loop in our existing buildings. So I sit in one of the buildings. This is now operating under heat pump supply, and those heat pumps are high temperature heat pumps driven through an ambient loop to share heat between the buildings and operating at the same temperature as the existing heating system, so 80 degrees, and integrated with the existing boiler system. So it operates smoothly straight through heat pumps and then top up boilers at the end. It works. Nobody noticed it had happened. The only thing that happened is we won an award for collaboration. That's the way we have to make things happen faster. So in this way, I think it's important to understand that whilst we've got to get the energy use of our buildings down, we really need to shift rapidly away from gas. And why heat? Well, this is a little graph that I put together just to try and get people to understand what the problem was when we launched the UK Green Building Council in 2008, just to give them a sort of a sense of the ambition that needed to be, or what needed to be done. And of course, the UK has actually now shifted its 80% target to about 2035. So it's got steeper, and we haven't really hit the steep part of the curve yet. But that big purple bit, that's our existing homes. And there are 29 million homes in the UK. 85% of those are heated by natural gas, and that's going to have to end really soon. And that's a challenge for everybody in our entire industry. And I think part of where we need our building services and our knowledge about decarbonisation is into local authorities and into governmental organisations, so that the knowledge of engineering is at the top all the way through, and then is pushing for the right thing to happen. We've had many local authorities declare climate emergencies, and they're now desperately looking around because they're short of technical knowledge on how to do it. So,
can you wrap up that, please?
About to wrap up now. Finally, what we're doing currently is debating and informing. We're running something called the Climate Emergency Debate Series. We've had several on heat, and we started with one on the domestic stock, decarbonising it, and the next one is how on earth, on Thursday the 22nd of April, Earth Day, and we're going to talk about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is an amazing law which the Welsh government introduced and is affecting everybody's way of thinking in Wales. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thanks for wrapping up so promptly. Great presentation. We're finished with the presentations for the morning session, as it were. So now we'll have the panel discussion. It's going to be moderated by Azra Hussain, who's our CIBSE Yen representative in the UAE. Azra, are you there and are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Good.
I'm super excited.
Good.
Yes.
Good to hear. Good to hear. At this stage, can I just remind all guests to please turn off their cameras, so that everyone, barring the presenters, is not showing. So that would be much appreciated. And yeah, please carry on.
Thank you so much, Julian. And hello, everyone. My name is Azra Hussain. I am a CIBSE UAE officer, and I'm heading up the Energy Efficiency and Sustainability Program for Aramco Real Estate. The objective for today's panel discussion is to essentially have a power-packed session, engaging the audience on what is the global traction for net zero development, and what kind of lessons can we learn to apply it to different parts of the world, especially here in the Middle East. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our panelists, starting with Dr. Andy Ford from London Southbank University. Thank you for an amazing presentation and the role of academia in working towards climate change emergency, followed by Victoria Burrows from the World Green Building Council, Dean Katik from the Carbon Trust. Thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. And for representing the UAE chapter, we have Mr. Andy Shaw, who's going to be giving us a UAE perspective on policies and framework, and Dr. Mohtaz Hussain, who's also going to talk a bit more about academia. So before we begin, I'd like to give you all a few insights on what has been the traction in terms of committing to the COP, the recent COP26 pledge. One of the pledges by the UK government is to reduce emissions by 68% from 1990 levels. And
Azra,
yes.
1 second. We can still see Andy's slides.
Oh, right.
So Andy, you need to stop presenting. And may I please ask all the panelists to turn their cameras on?
Yes.
Azra, I can't. I don't think.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Great. And can we ask the attendees to switch off their turn off their cameras, please?
Muhammad Ashraful Alam, can you please turn your camera on, please, and keep it turn off and keep it turned off, please?
Great. Welcome to our panel, Mr. Ashraful Alam as well. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of the panel discussion. So just to give you quick insights, the UAE has committed to reducing its emissions by 23.5% as compared to business as usual. So I'd like to begin our dialogue with welcoming Victoria Burrows from the World Green Building Council. Round of applause. To give us some insights on, how is the UK keeping track of its emissions, emission goals that were set for 2050?
Yeah,
and how
sure. Thanks, Azra. And I think Andy covered it a lot better than me, to be honest. I'm not actually in the UK or too much work there, so at least he was able to help us with the graphics that were shown. And yes, inevitably targets that are set for net zero by 2050 are being shifted forward. Those actions that can be taken, such as decarbonising the electricity grid, are making huge. There is massive progress happening within the UK context specifically. And as Andy sort of alluded to, the biggest challenge of reaching those net zero goals are the kind of challenges around the gas grids and what happens with the heat networks and things like that are much harder challenges to overcome in even that time frame. So yeah, there are some shifting around on dates and such like, but this is a really important year for the UK, especially because this year's COP26 program will be held in the UK, hosted by the UK government. So we're hopeful that we'll see some excellent announcements with respect to the built environment and action from the UK government between now and November, and maybe even during the COP programme itself, to really try and accelerate that action that can be taken now.
Great. So I'd like to gain some perspectives from Dr. Andy Ford. I know Dr. Andy Ford has given us some great examples of what are the trends in building services in the UK with respect to addressing the built environment emissions. But how do we see the UK shaping up with the new normal, especially after the pandemic and the climate change emergency, especially with respect to the building sector? Dr. Andy Ford, you're on mute. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the pandemic is having a really interesting effect. I mean, this is one of the effects. We're experiencing it right now, how we're now communicating with each other across the world. I think the other is we're all sitting at home, at least I'm sitting at home, not all of you are sitting at home, but I think that might continue quite a lot. And in the UK in particular, it's actually definitely driving the way people look for where they live. It's changing their inclination to live in a central London significantly. And that's good news for UK, because the UK is incredibly centralized at the moment, and it needs to move away from that. What else does that mean? It means that the energy in our homes is going to become more important. It means that all the knowledge of building services engineers tends to be really focused at the non-domestic area. And we need to try and work out how we actually influence and change the domestic area.
Right.
That's one thing. I mean, just in terms of the what's going on in energy, it might be interesting to know that our current carbon intensity is 110 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour on average, but actually it's quite a windy day at the moment. And if I just had a look at it, and in North Scotland it's 0, South Scotland it's 17, and then down to Wales it's 252. So it varies across the country. I think our biggest challenge will be gas, and the biggest challenge there is the incumbents. How do we influence them to go in the right direction? And the biggest thing I can see coming at the moment is a desire by the incumbents to encourage the idea that we put in hydrogen-ready boilers. That's not good enough, personally.
Right.
It's just not going to work. It's a highly inefficient approach to doing it, and carbon-ready or hydrogen-ready is not doing it. It's got to be done. That means we've got to teach engineers how to communicate and influence, which they're not very good at quite often.
Obviously, yes. I think it's important for the new generation, the upcoming generation, to sort of play the role of wearing many hats, aside from being sustained to one particular discipline. So just to move the dialogue forward, I'd like to loop in Dean Kathy to basically provide us with what kind of latest methodologies are currently being adopted across the UK. I know you mentioned about the greenhouse gas protocol and carbon auditing. How is the uptake in the UK with these new methodologies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that given that it's being adopted gradually across different companies and across sector-wide initiatives as well, you find that this is something that sort of there's a sort of a balance that needs to be struck between, I know that companies want to be very ambitious and want to set these targets in order to let's say Sainsbury's wants to be net zero by 2040, but then Tesco comes out a few months later and say we want to do the same, but by 2035. You know, and then you can go down this rabbit hole of you know, trying to be better than your competition, but really being clear in what's being what you're targeting. So yeah, I think this is that's from the company side, but then from sort of a holistic framework side, that's being guidance is being developed across sectors, especially by the Science Based Targets Initiative, where they're coming out with sector-specific guidance. So yeah, it's a gradual process, but also it needs to be, you don't want a company, if I was on the sustainability board of a company or a team of a company, I wouldn't want them to go out and just set an ambition without some credibility. So.
Absolutely. It's essentially, as Victoria and Andy rightly mentioned, that there's a need for collaboration. We all, as stakeholders, need to work together to achieve measurable and realistic targets for 2050. And yes, we can set high-level targets, but we need more research and development, innovation, intervention to help us mobilize and expedite our journey towards reaching those high-level targets and taking a more granular look at the building services systems and solutions that Dr. Andy mentioned with respect to the big ticket items in the build sector, which is mainly comprising of heating elements and heating systems, taking a look at new types of technologies and new trends. And with that perspective, I'd like to invite Mr. Andrew Shaw, who's representing RIBA Gulf, to provide an architect's perspective, as well as how can the UAE move forward with the net zero agenda, taking the lessons learned from different parts of the world, especially the UK.
Hi, everybody. Hi, this is Andrew Shaw. I'm an architect working here in Dubai and the chair of the RIBA Gulf chapter. I'd like to introduce a few concepts I think particularly relevant when we're talking here in a conference with CIBSE and representing RIBA and talking about government level kind of things. We're so used to working day to day on normally one project at a time or even a big master plan that when you start going to the country level and institution level, it's a different thing. And I think it's this big picture of how to work together to achieve a global net zero, or even just a country's net zero. Because when you're looking at just one building, it's obviously challenging enough, and especially in this region. And there's some typology, some sites, it becomes more feasible, less feasible. But I have the thing I said, carbon sees no borders or no plot limits. And we have to get to net zero through many different roads available. When you have the big picture of looking at a whole city or whole plots, you can target different parts of the problem and allow some to be more effective, more efficient, less efficient than others to get to an overall net zero. Because from what we know, it's very hard to do it here. You have to allow things like offsetting for now. And I think also here a big push on technology. I think when again look at the big picture, 10, 20 years, there's a big push to have 3D concrete printing here. It's not commercially viable yet on a big scale, but I've seen studies where there's a sort of 50 to 80% improvement in embodied carbon through using concrete. And building in this region, timber is not an option, so you're left with concrete and steel as your main options, and neither of them particularly low carbon. So technology is going to play a key role also in generating power, as has a lot of potential, whether it's on-site or off-site. So I think the medium long-term potential to get even beyond net zero and positive is actually quite good here. But in the current environment, have to use offsetting to get down or close to zero. And I think work at the government level, it's dangerous just to look plot by plot, project by project, have to look at whole developments. And where governments can come in, RIBA has been lobbying in the UK actually to have a kind of carbon tax. We introduced a VAT here. I think they should have had a CAT, a carbon tax, to help address this issue of penalising bad behaviour and making us all live in big fridges across the city. And using that to kind of directly fund things like, whether it's the UK replacing gas boilers with electric ones, or here building more solar plants. I think there has to be a kind of government-wide economic push. It's a kind of war on carbon. It's not just to be tackled building by building. It needs all the tools. I think, like we've seen with the pandemic, it's lots of actions at once, and it's lots of disciplines working together. And I think that's why conferences like these are so important. It's got to go beyond companies and disciplines into really getting everybody to do their bit to make all these kind of small percentages come together to get 100%, and then better to get down below net zero as a normal if we look decades ahead.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Andrew. I'd like to loop in Dr. Mohtaz to give us an academic perspective on how can we prepare our future leaders to bracing the climate change emergency.
Thank you, Azra. Basically, I feel like I want to highlight 3 key points. What needs the future course curriculum? Secondly, the global and collaborative learning, and thirdly, apprenticeship. So the first thing is that because I was involved in developing course curriculum in University of Westminster, which is a new course like architecture and environmental design, I feel like that it is very important to reevaluate the courses that undergraduate level and postgraduate level that we already have in the UK or globally, and that's because we need to change some of the criteria, not only from the university level but also from the criteria that being provided by RIBA, for example. They have to also change these criteria so that they are fit together, work together for the net zero future. And that's very important, and that need collaborations. It's not only like a university should focus on the university and delivery. It's also about linking between the criteria made by RIBA, how university performing, and how students actually working. So this collaboration required. Good thing, it's also important to collaboration between the like engineer, architects, and all interdisciplinary collaborations. One of the advantage of this pandemic we learned that we can do collaborations. We can. One of the good thing of being online, for example, that in the university we can bring experts from various parts of the world. You don't have to travel. So it means that we can share knowledge that way. And that's also I found very important to integrate within the curriculum and the academia to involve practitioners, academics, research, so that they work together, so that it's not like a partial they're segregated. And another thirdly is the apprenticeship. It means that that you all think of the future leaders that involve probably the undergraduate student or postgraduate student. What about the others who are actually learning? They haven't gone through this kind of course curriculum in the future. Probably we should provide apprenticeship degrees or something from the university level, so that they can, from companies, industry can let them get some knowledge that's required to know about the zero carbon future, so that they can work better. So it's no matter what level they are, in the practice. So that could help to work globally. It's a very long-term idea, to be honest. However, if you will start now, I'm sure that at some point we find it all collaborate and working smoothly. That's I can just add from my perspective.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohtaz. We've got a couple of questions from our attendees. The first question is from Mr. Omar Khorshid, and the question goes out to Mr. Dean Katik. What is the role of standardized framework for measuring an organization's net emissions? And I think you've shed a bit of light on greenhouse gas emissions. If you could.
Yeah, thank you, Omar, for the question. So I think, he asked, is there a standardized framework? So the framework that has been around for a number of years and is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. I think that's very well established across every sector in terms of how to account for your carbon, and then also how to report it effectively. And so, yeah, there's a corporate standard, so that looks at specifically the organization, but then you have the value chain standard as well, which is more in depth in terms of looking at your upstream and downstream. And yeah, I think there are also standards coming from the ISO, so International Organization for Standardization, as well. So yeah, I think whichever, they're all well established. They're all very, a lot of years go into producing these standards, and a lot of organizations come together to provide advice and consultation. So I know that the carbon neutrality one is also being updated now to be in line with net zero. And for instance, if you think of this year or the past year, 2020, how most organizations globally had a decrease in emissions. So, and then probably that'll be going up, if we predict into 21, 22. So how does that account, how do you account for that when you have to show reductions year on year? So yeah, I think things like global pandemics maybe weren't considered when some frameworks were being written. But yeah, I think just whatever framework is being used, it's just important to be clear about the boundaries, the scope. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Dean Karthik. We have another question coming in from Derek Taylor. It's more aligned with taking a more granular look at technologies and how we can achieve zero carbon. So his question is addressing heating, cooling networks, the role of domestic, the role of DHP and CHP systems to deliver, how can they be delivered on existing housing stock? And I think that question would be more directed to Dr. Andy Ford, since he's an expert in building services. Your voice is on mute.
Okay, so that's certainly one of the things that I've been worrying about for quite a while now. And I've become personally quite convinced that the starting point is our existing housing, which is on central heating networks already, on district heating networks already, and shifting those towards heat pump solutions. Personally, I think the answer that will get us rolling, that will get the heat pumps that we need being produced, being manufactured and being sold and available. And then we need to move towards ambient loops, because that starts to mean that you can do it locally. So the problem with trying to do our large CHP plant is you need a big load, and you need to have that pre-organized, pre-agreed, and that's a big barrier. So we need a way that things can happen more organically. And on site at the campus, we've just linked two buildings with an ambient loop, linked to the ground store, linked to the aquifer. That means that they can be potentially linked to the next one, and then one across the road and down the road can happen, and eventually it can all start to link together. So slowly but surely you can start to do things. And the advantage of ambient loops is that they can take heat from any source, and they can provide cooling. And cooling will be a big sell point, if nothing else. It will be a sell point in modern new flats. How on earth we do domestic? Well, we need to invent some really good heat pumps that people want to buy and get the price down so that they buy them, and then with the energy suppliers.
That's right. I mean, that's an interesting vision. I mean, the ambient source heat pump sounds quite idealistic, and it kind of links all the buildings and the entire city together to sort of create this symbiosis and an integrated communication.
To be fair, we've had ambient loops within buildings, and for many years, many hotels operated like that in the old days. So it's like you've had the experiment at room by room level. You now need to move it onto a city level. So
right. And that's actually quite great for the UAE context, as we are still scratching the surface with new technologies and new building services systems. So it's great that we learn about these new types of opportunities that can be introduced into the UAE climate context.
I think one of the things that may be of interest is the where you stop looking for electricity, start looking for temperature.
Right.
Find a good source of cold. And you'll by the sea, and deep water temperatures are very stable.
Right. That's perfect. Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions lined up. One on a more financial perspective, and I'd like to get some insights from Dean Karthik about how is the Carbon Trust supporting the climate change program by adapting new financial mechanisms like the green bonds. Would you be able to give us some insights on that forefront?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one sector that's not always looked at when in sustainability is the finance sector, and I think that's definitely a key component. I mean, across sustainability is the influence of shareholders and external factors to any company. So we have a green finance team at the Carbon Trust, and who work with a variety of organizations from investment banks, helping, for instance, the likes of Barclays to set green bonds linked to sustainability initiatives. And then we also are working quite a lot on quantifying climate risk. Helping companies adapt to the recommendations of the TCFD, which is the Task Force for Financially Related Climate Disclosures. So basically, what are the climate change risks and opportunities that will affect a company in the coming years? And that's something that's being implemented in the UK by the UK government, I think, in 2023 or 25, I can't recall the year, but they're all publicly listed companies. All pension funds will need to disclose any climate risks for their operations. And just an example as well, how the terminology is misused. There was a conference last month hosted by Bloomberg, and there was the former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, speaking, and he mentioned how his asset management firm, Brookfield, is currently net zero. So he said we're now net zero across, all our assets, or he just said we're net zero at the moment, which really caught a lot of people off guard, because that's completely not true. I mean, just because they invest in a few renewable or have some renewables in their portfolio doesn't mean that the billions of dollars they have in fossil fuels is actually net zero. So yeah.
Right. Yes. So there's an increasing need for third-party intervention in sort of vetting and checking for transparency and accuracy in disclosed data and information by big corporations. With that, I'd like to gain some insights because we still have some more time. So we can gain some more insights from academia, from Dr. Mohtaz on the research and development forefront. You've shared some interesting insights of how students and millennial engineers or professionals can brace themselves for the new normal. Can we know how is it open to generalists? I mean, we've so far seen that there's been a norm of engineering, mainly engineering disciplines being tied up to the climate change dialogue. But how can generalists, like professionals from various fields of, say, for example, English literature or from other diverse backgrounds like culinary backgrounds, can come and engage to the program?
Thank you, Azra. That's a very good question, and I will try to answer. I don't know whether it's going to be right, but one thing I can say, if I focus on the general layman, anybody who can understand this, the global awareness in no matter what profession they are, but you can see that people are quite used to their smartphone, right? So they kind of know how to use the smartphone, how to utilize it, various perspectives. At the moment, we see only pictures of taking photos of something, but you can use smartphone for various purposes. For example, some of the research I was working on IoT, where you actually can connect your devices that is connected to Wi-Fi or low carbon devices, that it helps you to understand the environmental situations, like what's the temperature going on. We have smart meter in our in our houses, and that's basically anybody, doesn't matter where the profession they are, they actually know how they can interact with them. So now, and when you do the research, I was working on these IoT devices where you get real-time data, and students actually started to understand what's the temperature have effect, and you can see visualizations. So I guess this is something in academia, smart technologies can be, though smart technology is tricky because it maybe feel like they have a carbon footprint at some point. But you can, if you're using it like a more holistic way, say for example, if you use your smartphone to understand what is the pollution scenario outside, okay, and then you react with that. So like whether I should open the window or not, or what. So this kind of it can be done in a very various levels. So not necessarily happen to be in the architecture or engineering study, but also in other studies where you can see how smart technologies can be useful for learning. So it could be in the school level. It's not necessarily has to be university level to understand that you can use that smart beyond only the typical uses of the phone. You can also use the apps for different purposes. So that's, I can say, like one way. Other things is that in terms of research, yes, this is very important. We always think, still know something, thinks that research is something expertise, and we cannot, but we can involve students for research, because some students will find it, you can integrate the research within your design projects or engineering projects or anything, and that could be research part, and that started to learn the research, and they will start to value the research rather than think this is a research and I'm doing something else. So this is something I don't know whether I can answer, but this is something you can think of.
Right. Obviously, I think we're living in the new age where it's all about smart technology and IoT, and it's essentially digitization integrates various disciplines, and it very finely advocates the integration principles and empowers various professionals from various backgrounds to be more technically sound and to be more aware of what is the current trends in technology, especially with respect to climate change. Say by measuring the ambient conditions to even doing a quick commissioning or a quick test, checking for leaks on your in your bedroom just by taking an infrared camera snapshot. It's become so easy for end users to use technology to be climate change advocates and net zero professionals. So technology really empowers users to measure and manage their consumption, their data, from weight trackers to energy trackers. So thanks to the smartphone technology and the Internet of Things, it sort of closes the gap and makes us more smarter as well. With that, I'd like to get some thoughts from Victoria as well, as we're nearing the end of the panel discussion. I mean, what kind of lessons learned or what kind of recommendations would you give for a growing market in sectors of the Middle East and Africa that's aligned towards sustainability goals?
Hi, yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I have a bit of a reflection based on what I've heard from the other panelists as well. I think someone had mentioned earlier about sort of making sure that students currently going through their architecture or their engineering degrees are prepared to be leaders of the future. I mean, I was an architecture student, and those students currently in undergraduate won't be leaders if they're designing net zero buildings. By the time they graduate, it will be expected of them. Yeah. It will be required by investors, it will be required by clients, and it will be required by regulation as it is in some parts of the world. And I hope in 7 years' time, we've made a bit more of a dent into that as well. So I would strongly urge that within the academic practices that net zero buildings are required as part of projects now, that you can wait for a sort of global curriculum. And I know that some of that's being incorporated into curriculums in some areas, but these students need to come into industry prepared and ready to play their part in that net zero agenda that we've been talking about already. It's not the role of the architect to make a net zero building. It's not the role of an engineer to take it as a building design and make it net zero. We have to be collaborating across the sector, and so every discipline has to ensure that every project they're working on, they're doing absolutely everything they can to ensure that building is designed for a net zero economy. And that means designing out gas, that means thinking about the future climate scenarios, it means future modeling, it means, yes, some reliance on technology, but absolutely not all reliance on technology. There's a role for technology, there's a role for offset to help overcome some of the barriers in terms of the availability of technology for today. But we absolutely need to be designing these buildings right from the beginning. Yeah. And so I think the question about how can UAE move forward on that agenda is that needs to be in the mindset of every practitioner within this sector, within every part of the world, and especially within the UAE. We have some real mountains to climb here in terms of changing our approach to how we design, operate buildings. And so much can be done based on what's already available in the market today. I would just really compel you to take your projects and your thinking as far as you possibly can. I don't think you should wait for clients to ask you for net zero buildings. Right. I want you to think about presenting a net zero option to whatever the brief has been provided, because that building can be net zero, and it's the opportunity that you're being presented to educate that client. If we wait for clients to ask, we are not going to get there in time.
Absolutely, very eloquently putting the point across that yes, net zero stays in the heart of the solution, and we need to start thinking about considering that as a part of our value proposition and business portfolio and building our own personal brand. Dr. Andy Fraud, any thoughts on recommendations for the UAE?
Oh, recommendations for the UAE. Well, since you're building lots of buildings, then that's the opportunity to show it's possible. I think that's maybe your biggest opportunity, really. I mean, I totally agree with Victoria that we should be building now, and our architects should know how to do it now, and our engineers should know how to do it now. I suppose I worry about whether the teachers know how to teach students to know how to do it now. And there's a task there which you could take a lead in making sure that the teachers of architecture and engineering in the existing organizations, universities, do know and do want to teach their students how to design zero carbon buildings and do it in a beautiful way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Andy Ford. Any comments? Dean Katik, any recommendations for the UAE? Trust.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Farah and Azra as well. I think, you know, there's the sort of disconnect from what I see generally in a lot of companies and countries, that, you know, governments set ambitions and then companies set their own ambitions. Some are more ambitious than the other, but in any case, I mean, I think having a sort of top-down approach where the UAE government maybe would, you know, I mean, impose sort of, if you want to operate within the UAE, you would have to achieve so and so by a certain year. So whether that be with their energy supply that the companies are procuring, what transportation. I know that, you know, there's a very high reliance on cars. I mean, I grew up actually in Dubai, so I know that, you know, everyone has, you know, an average of, you know, 2 cars or more per family. I mean, it's very heavily reliant. So, I mean, if that's the case, it's maybe harder to shift consumers and perspectives, maybe than just shifting towards more electrical vehicles. But then how are those electrical vehicles actually powered? You know, it could be nice headline to say UAE has 100% EVs, but if it's all powered by natural gas and coal, well, I'm not sure the fuel mix at the moment, but so that's one thing. And then I think also with waste, I think there was an analysis done a few years ago by what's it called? I forgot the name of the organization, but basically showing how per capita what the waste is, and I think a lot of countries in the Middle East turned out as top performers, which means worst worst in the category. So yeah, rethinking that, we just rethinking how we go about the day-to-day life, and whether that be as Mohtaz and Victoria mentioned, through education programs, through government-wide initiatives. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of different pieces to connect, but I think the UAE has the right ambitions in place to achieve that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dean Katik. Just to add to that point about the current trends in the UAE with the recent net zero development from the Emirates Green Building Council, we've seen some active traction towards meeting our sustainability development goals across the UAE. And we might see some new regulations coming in with respect to setting landfill tipping fees tax to reduce waste to landfill generation rates here across the UAE and the GCC. So yes, I think we definitely if we need to start working collaboratively and continuously having a dialogue. But yes, we are definitely moving in the right direction and making sure that we meet our overarching goals. Final words from Dr. Mohtaz Hussain. Dr. Mohtaz, any recommendations for the UAE?
I guess the one thing is important is for UAE that could be in an academic perspective, because some of the climatic scenario, extreme heat, etc. And of course, we are surviving for years without air conditioning before. So as you asked before, what we can do in terms of literature, for example, we can learn from the past. So from some old traditional architecture or vernacular architecture that we can learn, and that is very simple to understand. And that is we can do. And for UAE, I guess in terms of policy level, this could be part of to know how to survive and how to design, or what's people used to do for surviving the extreme climate. And for the net zero future, we can achieve that. So you have to, maybe it's a good idea to make people aware it is possible. It's not like, yeah, we are talking about something, it's not possible. We just need to say this kind of awareness and also collaboration. So that is, I can tell from my perspective at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Mohtaz. And final words from Dr. Andrew Shaw, Mr. Andrew Shaw from Reba Girls.
Hi there. Hi. Yeah. I'll add one thing. It may not be what you want to hear, but it's my experience of reality. And a few years ago, I had two separate clients insisting on an all-glass building. And when I said why, and why it was a bad idea, they said because that's what the market wants. This is for residential and a separate commercial building. The last year or two have had more clients really wanting something sustainable. But at the end of the day, we do live in a very commercially driven city and very competitive market for the developers and clients. And that's why I do think the top-down approach with quite tough, proactive government legislation is needed to really force the net zero down, because it can be very hard to convince the clients otherwise to do it. There's a lot of people within them just looking at the numbers. And at the moment, it's the things they look at when they look at the value of their building and how they're going to do it. It's they have a bit of a race to the bottom often, sadly. There's obviously the exceptions are the more one-off buildings, but when the bulk of the building are residences and offices, hotels, and things. So I think it needs the industry obviously needs awareness and skills to do it, and making sure all's aware of the commercial implications. But I feel at the moment it's such an urgent issue. The government has to come in and say, they could say you have to be net zero as in a few years' time, but you're going to pay for your carbon. You can pay to offset it or design it out. Either way, you're going to pay for it one way or another, and maybe then it'd make a bigger difference. But yeah, I definitely feel we need some government support, because it's not enough just for designers to push it.
And yes, I think yes, as Dr. Andrew, Mr. Andy Shaw has rightly mentioned that yes, we need a top-down approach. Obviously, we need some kind of mandate to make sure that all of our industries and sectors across the value chain are aligned towards the Climate Change Emergency Act. And actually, before we close off, there's a nice comment from one of our attendees, Mr. Neil Bilton, who's just mentioned that the ball is already rolling across the UAE, especially on the academic forefront. We've seen that there are solar decathlons being carried out. So we already have on an education forefront, there's already an awareness about sustainability, research and development in the UAE. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the panelists. It was surely a very interesting panel discussion, and we hope that we can continue this dialogue and have a repeat discussion in the next few months or so. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for your moderation, Azra, and many thanks to all our panelists for that lively discussion. And also, before everyone leaves, I can see a lot of people leaving. We do have a number of presentations for the next hour, so please do stay for them. So I'm assuming we'll just get cracking, yeah?
Yes.
Did you want me to share Mina's presentation? I've got it ready.
All right, you can go ahead and share it if you've got it on your system.
So. Just also let me know if you can hear the audio.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this exciting event. In this crucial decade of climate action, we cannot simply advocate for a resilient future.
Can you hear that?
Yes,
Can you
Julian.
just confirm?
Yes.
Thank you.
Unless we're demonstrating the change we want to see ourselves within the built environment sector. We must collectively transform the buildings we design, build, and occupy to be net zero. This must become our reality, where a shared commitment and a collective action will enable us to deliver a prosperous future for us and the generations to come. This is exactly the legacy we have been building over our 85-year history at SOM. We're an incubator of creative ideas that lead us to deliver unique innovations and pioneer new capabilities. In all of our work, we seek opportunities to collaborate, not only with industry experts, but with academics, internationally renowned organizations, and most importantly, with over 1,200 professionals across our 10 offices around the world. This diverse pool of knowledge and collective experience enable us to apply global expertise at a local level, enriching any proposal we offer. Our interdisciplinary and integrated approach is our unique offering to a wide range of international clients, with whom we have been building pioneering buildings all around the world. We're driven by one ambition and mission, and that is to help build a better future for us all by delivering built environments that address environmental, societal, and economic challenges of our time. In a quest to build a better future, we never lose sight of the urgency that the context of reality presents today, where climate change is already showing signs with the unfortunate storms, floods, sea level rises, heat waves, and wildfires, currently risking livelihoods of 4,000 people only in the Arabian Peninsula every year. The global context also shows that the planet's natural ecosystem is degrading every day, with 1 million species currently threatened with extinction. This is the reality of today, but when we look at the future, we immediately see that there are parallel growing challenges ahead. The anticipated population growth by 2.4 billion people within the next 30 years is already demanding intense densification of our existing cities today. To respond to that population growth, 230 billion square meters of buildings will be constructed and or renovated in cities worldwide. And these cities that we're helping build and densify today significantly contribute to global warming, currently responsible for 40% of the annual global greenhouse gas emissions. We also recognize that although growing cities can bring benefits, failure to manage rapid urbanization well will bring risks of profound social instability, with increased poverty, inequity, and vulnerability in societies all around the world. When coupled with heat waves, among other phenomena, our cities will also pose growing health risks. World Health Organization already anticipates that climate change will cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year in the future. So our responsibility in the fight against climate change goes beyond just minimizing our negative impact onto the planet, and it embraces safeguarding our own health for the future. In a quest to build a resilient future and to holistically address the growing urgency that the context of reality presents today, at SOM, we're guided by 10 design principles that are underpinned by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. These design principles provide a framework through which we evaluate and carefully address a multitude of priorities in tandem against measurable targets defined under ecology, carbon, water, materials, waste, and equity, among others, which are all central to the prosperity of people, planet, and economy. Today, I particularly would like to focus on the operational energy and carbon design principle and present a case study where a rather low-tech building achieves a very high performance and becomes the New York City's first net zero operating energy school and one of the first of its kind in the world. The Kathleen Graham School for Leadership and Sustainability at Sandy Ground, also known as PS62, pushes the boundaries of creative, collaborative, and ambitious design, challenging the norms of best practice and establishing a new benchmark for all school buildings in New York City, as well as in other parts of the world. By engaging all the stakeholders along the value chain and by leveraging passive and active design strategies, our design team was over 10 years ago able to deliver a net zero vision for this building, which is to this date its reality. 5 overarching goals were established at design stage of this project on day 1. And it is these goals that continue to ensure the building's net zero performance to date. These goals include minimizing energy demand through passive design strategies, optimizing energy use with integrated and efficient building systems, as well as supporting technologies, generating as much energy on site as possible, engaging occupants throughout the design, delivery, and operation of the building, and embedding a rigorous as well as a continuous monitoring and optimization system in place to extend the net zero life of this building. At the core of the Kathleen Grimm School's net zero performance lies its creative architecture, where passive design strategies are maximized. The building's form, orientation, and its courtyard are carefully defined to maximize daylighting in order to reduce dependence on artificial lighting, which can be a significant energy demand in a school building. Skylights and clerestory windows fill the classrooms and corridors with abundant daylight, achieving more than 80% daylight autonomy throughout the school. In this approach, the building saves a significant amount of energy while also creating an uplifting learning environment for more than 400 elementary students and faculty. Another key component of the school's design that renders this building so high-performing is one of its most visually distinctive features, a highly insulated exterior rain screen with 9-meter-tall precast concrete panels that anchor the facade at the top and the bottom only, eliminating the need to puncture the air and vapor barrier along the building's height. With this approach, the building not only reduces its energy demand, but also minimizes maintenance requirements and maximizes indoor comfort throughout the year. In addition to maximizing passive design strategies, the Kathleen Grimm School also leverages active strategies and efficient building systems to optimize its performance while also enhancing user comfort, health, and overall well-being. Some of the key active strategies deployed throughout the project include a hybrid geothermal system that helps to naturally heat and cool the building, demand controlled ventilation that saves energy without compromising indoor comfort, solar thermal that provides domestic hot water heating, very low energy equipment and lighting, and occupancy sensors that prevent energy wastage in unoccupied spaces. All of these strategies enable the building to achieve more than 50% energy savings when compared to typical public schools in New York City. This cutting-edge building's net zero ambition also defines its unique architectural identity. An energy-generating canopy of more than 2,000 photovoltaic panels wraps the building and harvests as much energy each year as the building consumes. Working with the Center for Architecture, Science, and Ecology, which is a research laboratory formed in partnership between SOM and the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the design team was able to maximize the building's energy generation potential on site by carefully placing the PV panels at different angles and in various configurations, which optimize their performance. As a result, the school's energy generation increased by 35% and led the development of its distinctive roof structure. Throughout all of these strategies and more, the team was able to significantly reduce the school's overall energy use. Nonetheless, there was still an opportunity to go even further, especially knowing that almost half of the building's energy demand would very much be dictated by the way occupants use the space that the team was designing. Influencing occupant behavior, therefore, was a critical part of the overall design and now operation of the Kathleen Grimm School at Sandy Ground. To ensure alignment to the project's net zero goal, and to secure consistency throughout the process, the design team partnered with the building's occupants on day one. In this rather unusual scenario, through a visionary yet pragmatic approach, the wider project team, including all the key stakeholders, worked collectively to lay the groundwork for a net zero reality. All of this work was eventually culminated in a building user manual, which continues to inform the standards for the future public school buildings in New York City today. Students have also become a part of the Kathleen Grimm School's net zero journey. Working with the design firm Pentagram, the wider project team developed a system of interactive visual displays placed throughout the building. These visual displays include dashboards that are designed to both educate the students about the building and engage them as active participants in achieving its net zero goal. This culture of shared accountability established at the design stage of the project continues to be at the forefront when it comes to the building's use, operation, and management. A continuous monitoring and optimization system embedded with a 3-year commissioning period and consistent post-occupancy evaluations guarantee the building's ongoing net zero performance. A reputation for walking the walk, incorporating net zero performance criteria in the building's specifications and procurement process, as well as engaging the project team post-completion, have inspired confidence in the school authority that this building was establishing a new precedent of how the future school buildings were going to be designed, built, and operated. The Kathleen Grimm School points the way to the future, where research-based creative design, collaborative approach from day one, and commitment to long-term responsibility offers an opportunity to seamlessly harmonize the physical, man-made, and the natural environment of our planet, rendering us, as built environment professionals, the standard bearers in the fight for the future of our well-being. Thank you.
Okay, so many thanks to Mina Hasman from Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And I'm sure you'll agree that was a great blueprint for future school buildings and what they might look like. Next up, we have a presentation from Dylan Brady. He is an architect with Isabel Architecture. And Azra, if you can cue up that presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you. From Melbourne, Dylan Brady, Isabel Architecture. I wish I was able to be present with the conference. However, think of the carbon we're saving.
It's fine.
I'm doing this digitally. Isabel Architecture is an architecture practice that is located and headquartered in Melbourne. We're about 20 staff, but we work through the Vesica Pisces of Southeast Asia, as far west as the UAE, and as far east as New Zealand, and a couple of new projects on the west coast of the United States of America. We're a pretty dedicated team committed to sustainability, but we're also intent on acting ethically, on thinking ecologically, and on delivering exceptional outcomes. Inside the Pixel building, which we designed for a Lucky Future office, we never considered it would in fact be for ourselves. But from here, we really work around the world to deliver exceptional outcomes on purpose. The challenge and the topic today is net zero energy, or net zero. And that challenge really revolves in this industry around how can we make these, the cities and the buildings that are part of our output, to be more like these, the forests and the natural ecologies and ecosystems that work and have thrived and have refined themselves over billions of years. How can we bring the best of these things together and be very positive about that? Some examples of our work from around the world, China, Singapore, Malaysia, include hospitals, schools, community and cultural centres. There's a great interest across all of these projects in the purpose and the outcome of the work, the creation of place, the inspiration, the joy that we find in the built environment and our workplaces and our homes, and also the lyrical and the kind of the imaginative. How do we inspire people to take to look at the world with fresh eyes? From large breweries targeting net zero through to offices targeting Green Star and Platinum LEED, Platinum World projects, new sustainable communities. We're very interested in being able to underpin the built environment on an example of ecological sustainability. The Pixel building is a project I'm about to talk about. I'm going to follow that into the Shanghai Construction Group SCG 0+, and finish off with some talking about this project quite dear to our heart, a future project. Sustainability for us. Everything can be more or less sustainable, but for us, rating tools really are to sustainability as religions are to spirituality. There's an underlying truth and an underlying kind of medium to which these various tools and structures and scriptures give us some common ground, and that common ground is the key in making any changes to the world. Rating tools can be a fantastic lens to performance. Ultimately, each of these tools should be destined to make itself redundant, but they are a great way for us to find the commonalities between projects and understandings. Zero tools coming in now, zero water, zero waste, zero carbon, zero energy, are now starting to align with the passive house tools. And in the Venn diagram of all of this, how does LEED and BREEAM start to give us different filters to look at the performance of our projects? China 3-star and all of the regional tools from Malaysia through the Middle East to London to Singapore, all of these tools underpin what we see as being a great push towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. At the moment, the built environment seems to focus on goals 9 and 11, which are really the sort of the building bits. As we can start to see in the new tools that are coming through and the interest that we're trying to build in more cohesive and integrated ecological thinking, the remainder of these tools actually become party to the built environment that we're working in. And we can now have an impact on food and hunger, and we can have an impact on health and well-being and on the quality of the water below the land and the life above the land. We can start to affect all sorts of valent industries and aspects to the built environment through smart urban planning, smart building design, smart operations. Ultimately, until you find every one of the 17 SDGs has a part to play in thinking appropriately about your building design. The net zeros are a great tool where we're very keen to produce and promote energy, carbon, water, waste, materials, and ultimately people, culture, zero hungers, those things that actually work out ways that we can, with these tools, push the boundary as far as possible with our clients, ultimately not just to being less impactful, but actually to being ultimately what we like to think of as 0+, that sort of positive renewal. So if you take a standard kind of how do we reduce carbon emissions in the pyramid, Clearly, there's urban design at the bottom. We designed to be as passive and low energy as possible. We put in the highest performance systems. We articulate those crossover technologies that let us grow new ideas. We put in renewable energies on site. We have to harvest as much as we can, just as our planet does from its only solar-facing side. During the day, it generates all the power we use to have everything happen here. Ultimately, we want to shift this model and push it always forward so that we get into a net positive position, a net contributor to the world and to the environment. So I'm going to focus on these three projects now for a little while. The past is the Pixel building in Melbourne, Australia. It was completed in 2010. We started designing it in around 2006. And what we realized very quickly was sustainability is not a style. If you design something to look sustainable, you've forever cast that performance into a stylistic argument, which needs to be extremely, we need to be very wary of. So our building is iconic, it's brave, it's quite bold in its colours and shapes. It achieved a perfect score, every possible point in the Green Building Council Green Star rating tool. We got the highest score in BREEAM and LEED, and we are well above the 75 points you need. And so we really demonstrated excellence across all of the aspects of the tool, from native grasses, xeriscape landscapes, wind turbines, the lot. We had everything in here to really demonstrate that you could build a building in a transferable way. This could be 60 stories, 50 stories, or 20 stories. A lot of research, a lot of thinking, a lot of really great minds took part in that project, and the sum of the parts is much more than all of these components. And to the credit of the project team, and actually living in the building and working in the building now, some of these things don't work, and it's about understanding which of the things don't work and learning from that. So when you're not finding something, you're not pushing that boundary, the goiter line of testing to failure, then you really are not learning anything. And so we're actually able to take those lessons and, being bold and being net zero and being brave, actually ship them into new projects. So in 2010, Pixel achieved 105 points from the US LEED rating system. It's the highest rated building in the world, yet certified anywhere. That's a lot of buildings. And sadly, this remains the case 11 years later. And so this team, our team, we've been really designing from this building to try and beat it and take it to the next level and see what happens in 2022. So SCG 0 Plus, which we're calling the present in Shanghai, China, is a project that is designed to take those lessons and see where we could push performance, operation, materials, design into today's tools. And so there's that Venn diagram again, this time with Chinese translations. The Chinese have been fantastic in their backing of the project to try and develop this truth. This project sits within all of those Venn diagram overlaps, and ultimately the project seeks to embody, achieve, and wrap a net around all of the 5 zeros, all of these rating tools, including Passive House, and produce ultimately a bit of a Rosetta Stone for rating tools, a bit of a thermometer on what we can do, what demonstration technologies we can embed, and how we can actually push architecture and buildings to change the rules by which we build buildings, all buildings in China from now on. That's how we get legacy changes in the projects that we're doing. So clearly for this particular project, the facade, it's our primary environmental organ, just like it is on our bodies. It's the interface, the membrane. It's where we harvest all of our energy. It's where we harvest our water. It's where we harvest our daylight from on the interior. And we've done some very, very, very detailed and developed some quite effective digital mock-ups that are now being tested and built in one-to-one scale in order to understand all of the components and minimizing glare and getting all of the systems right in order to be able to define what the indoor dynamics are of the spaces. This facade really envelops a Passive House project whose energy is all harvested from site. And so we're trying to get a very high efficiency, high performance building, reducing our energy use as much as possible, and being able to tune all of the tools to really deliver the outcomes we're looking for, not only in net zero energy, but in net zero water. So net zero water balance means that we're harvesting all of the water that we use inside the project on the site. including returning water through to the environment and the natural environment. Our energy strategy is really solar, solar, solar. We learned from Pixel that vertical turbines and micro turbines, whilst they have a visual demonstration, it's extremely fickle given the low quality of the air that we have due to urban turbulence. We're only a 25 metre, 30 metre high building, and turbines haven't delivered the outcomes we want. And so we've really pushed a solar component here. We're looking at about a 62 kilowatt per hour per metre squared budget, energy budget for the office building. So really, this building is like the olden day combine harvester, but it's a combined harvester where food, water, energy, light, everything we need is coming from this project. So you can see here the programmatic layers with ground floor. We've got a vegetarian kitchen producing lunches for all of the staff, but from food grown on site. We've got then a series of office levels and library levels and breakout levels for the office building and the building occupants on the way up, all the way up to the roof with the garden terraces and the solar panel harvesting. You can see the working heart of this project is this atrium space. It really is the main connector, the main kind of the lungs and heart of the project, if you will. Each office, there are 3 different tenants and they're split over multi-levels. So we're driving people up and down stairs and we're getting them active, we're getting them circulating, we're getting them being aware of, in the work productivity sense, what other people are doing in the space at the same time. And as you can see, there's a radical biophilia layer that's run over the top of this. So sports, physical excellence, there's a lot of really interesting outcomes when you overlay all of the tools together. We're talking about running tracks, we're talking about gymnasiums, dance halls, we're talking about all sorts of productive environments that we need to maintain and actually drive engagement into the physical reality of people. You can see the sports track running around the outside of the project here. I'm up to 13 minutes already, and so clearly I need to get a bit of a kick on. So from biophilia and that biophilia integration, really that project is our present cut at what we can do to be the most sustainable building in the world again. And if I've got just a bit of time to go to the future, 1 Victoria Street is a project for the Royal Society of Victoria to create a perpetual endowment fund to keep them teaching science to kids and politicians for the centuries to come. The site is at the fulcrum in Melbourne of our Hoddle grid turned off the north-south axis. And you can see that this site, we're actually only using the tiny, tiny little old weather station that's to the eastern side of the site, which is the same size as the diagonal half of a tennis court. And on this diagonal site, we intend to raise a tower that's 281 metres tall and create in this tower the tallest possible project we can make with all of these drivers in play. At 290 metres, it really is an icon for the city of Melbourne. It's net zero energy, net zero water. It's driven by engineering. This is our wind engineering and structural team, Burrows Happold and Mel Consult. Testing and shaping and driving the sustainability. And it really is then driven by exceptional sustainability, is what will become the world's tallest passive house, an innovative concrete tube with timber floors, net zero energy, net zero water, net zero waste, LEED Platinum, WELL Platinum, Green Star Platinum, and housing a UNESCO Global Centre for Excellence in the base of the tower. The project for us is a translational tool where we're doing this project and open sourcing all of the technology and the deliverables that we put together in the project in order to make sure that this project can really transform lives not only in Melbourne and Australia, but also around the world as a bit of an icon for the future and how we might possibly develop some of these projects. So from past to present to future, what's really critical is that we understand that we're all living in a bubble. Everything we do, everything we are, everything we need is in this bubble, and it's where we all live. And we have to approach that world, this environment, this biosphere that we have ethically, ecologically, and exceptionally. And that's what Isabel Architecture tries to do every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dylan Brady, for an interesting insight on what's happening in Australia right now with interesting trends on the Pixel project. And as rightly said, it's essentially creating a vision for sustainable architecture and for imaginative and innovative design. Amazing work in Australia. Congratulations. So we're going to move ahead with a presentation from Blake Jackson. Julian and I are switching gears, so I'm going to be emceeing and helping Julian. All right. Okay.
Azra, can you share Blake's?
Sure.
Sorry, I don't have it.
All right, no worries. Okay, sorry.
It was nice to see Blake presenting al fresco there.
Oh yeah.
Especially considering he was talking about biophilia, it seemed quite apt.
That's true. Right. Okay, so we're ready with Blake Jackson's presentation. I'm going to put myself on mute so you can hear Blake loud and clear. All right, get the show on the road.
Greetings, everyone. I'm here to talk about towards carbon positive architecture. My name is Blake Jackson, and I am an architect with Stantec in Boston, which is a global multinational built environment practice. And I serve as a senior associate and the U.S. Northeast Sustainable Design Leader. With that work, I have a slew of third-party credentials which come as part and parcel with that type of work. And again, I'm here to talk about a case study of a carbon positive building. I would like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Frisk, Boris, and Rachel, my boss, for helping me put this together. I couldn't have done this without them. And so we'll dive into it. So who is enabling net zero construction in North America? Well, certainly not these crew. And it's not necessarily Paris because we just rejoined. So what is it? Well, 10 years ago, we didn't get very far because we were just focusing on cost premiums being overcome by utility saving. But if we fast forward to today, the conversation has gotten much richer. We're talking about health and well-being. We're talking about treaties and resiliency. We're even talking about the UN Sustainability Development Goals. And we're using and seeing lots of drivers pushing towards a post-carbon, post-fossil fuel society. We have already built almost 600 buildings as of 2019. And again, this is a bit of a dated number. And I'm encouraged to see that this is transcending political boundaries as well as climate zones. Seems to, in fact, be following our population density into our most populated and also most dense and growing areas as well, regardless of politics and climate, which is encouraging. And we're starting to even see that the municipalities and states that did not exit the Paris Agreement are getting a leg up on the advantage. So we have codes and commitments as a big component of this. And one city, Boston, which is where my practice is located and I do a lot of my work in, is moving from a 17 to 18% based renewable energy utility grid to by 2070 being 80 to 90% renewable based. This is also in conjunction with zero waste systems, zero transportation emission systems, and ultra efficient buildings, both new and efficient. Dare I call it, it sounds a lot like the Green New Deal, right? This is what we in New York and other similar cities are beginning to work towards, to electrify and decarbonize by 2050. We're starting to see falling costs, both for renewables and as well as technologies. and this number continues to fall to the point to where it is more cost effective now to focus on renewables than it is to utilities, even though utilities are giving us rebates. So this is a look at rebates associated with passive house certification, upwards of $3,000 a unit in Massachusetts, as well as a pretty handsome net performance bonus, which if you go all electric could be pretty substantial in a dominated climate like we have. We also are seeing third-party rating systems finally acknowledging the need to recognize buildings pursuing net zero. LEED, Passive House, and Living Building Challenge, and more are doing so. We're seeing the technology becoming more approachable. So instead of the larger, clunkier, heavy dead load panels, we're starting to see more friendly technology for EVs, solar rooftops, and even solar driveways. We are seeing AIA membership firms and others sharing lessons learned through meeting the AIA 2030 commitment, as well as winning the AIA Code Top 10 award every year, and sharing that knowledge. And for whom and why? Well, the future generation demands it. If they are to be successful, if they are to thrive, if they are to benefit from the world that we inherited from those thinking about us when we were the future generations, well, they're not just sitting back and waiting for us. They're actually demanding it. You can ask Greta about that. But they deserve it too. And so I want to talk a little bit about mission to market, mission to mass market. So how do we move from mission-driven clients to mass market clients? And the Evolve One project in Waterloo, Ontario is such a project. This is Canada's first zero carbon building. It's developer driven, and so needs to be highly flexible. It's on suburban previously developed land, and it came in at a typical market rate Class A budget. They did not want to price out the tenants they wanted to attract. It's 104,000 square feet on 3 floors, open office spaces that could be various different sizes, or you could have one tenant that comes in and takes up the whole building. They have on-site PV, rigorous water conservation strategies in pursuit of its LEED Platinum certification, which it recently won, and a series of amenities. What I like about this building is it accommodates a deep, flexible floor plan, so it doesn't have to be designed around the alphabet shapes that we have been trained to do in passive design for years. It utilizes off-the-shelf materials and off-the-shelf technology to push the envelope to this point at this price point. And one of the innovations here is both its application of off-the-shelf technology as well as turnkey space rather than separate tenant improvement packages. That allowed the landlord to control the energy use, the plug loads, etc., the water use as well. And what we did was we oversized the PV based on the site that we had with the load reductions that we made early on in order to achieve the carbon positive strategy. This is a look at the site plan, just showing the location of Evolve One relative to the rails, relative to housing and the campuses it seeks to serve and recruit from. This is a look at the site with an ideal solar orientation towards the southeast with maximized rooftop PV layout and PV sized accordingly on the site in order to meet and exceed the base building load. We could have actually put more PV here, and this building is designed to be phased. They're actually building phase 2 right now. And again, this is a deep floor plate building. And I like that about it because it shows that you can have flexibility and passive strategies and high performance too. You can't, you don't have to throw out one with the other, which is sort of typical sense, right? This turns it up on its side, so you can have flexibility and high performance too, enabled through this turnkey space. And this is a look at the inside of the atrium. So we have a communicating stair, a 4,500 plant living wall system. So we didn't scrimp on style. We utilized biophilic design elements as well. So natural materials inside. One of the DNA components of net zero energy buildings, no matter where, is really fine-tuning the orientation and also the facades to their direction and the cardinal points. So in the left-hand image here, we see the most glazing on the north facade with the typical east-west facades articulated in this sort of vertical fenestration. On the right image, we have a solar chimney that preheats incoming air to the air handling units on a portion of the south facade, as well as slightly smaller than the north facade glazing with some solar control devices, and as you can see here, the PV and the electric vehicle parking located to the south. And understanding where we are in the world, working with an airtight envelope, incorporating elements from passive house and envelope commissioning into the facade. And again, a look at the turnkey fit-out spaces, so we're not scrimping style on the inside either. And so this is designed for startup, office, and lab spaces. And, you know, again, this just shows that it can be done, and it can be very lucrative and award-winning. So this building has won a slew of awards, and it has been actually verified in its performance to be carbon positive and net zero energy. Now, I want to talk a little bit for the remainder of the time that I have with you about the process as well as lessons learned. So how do we achieve this? We know that conventional wisdom says that if we focus on design and operational savings, we can achieve sustainable design outcomes, reduce maintenance, etc., within a realm of increased first cost premium. And we sort of turn that up on its head, because we utilize a true integrative design process with teams of integrated architecture all the way through solar planning and everything in between from across Canada for this particular project. And we turn the hierarchy of the work process up on its head. So we started with the tenant strategies first, then maximization of passive design strategies, then chose active systems to meet that need, and then sized our renewable strategies. We could have turned this back up on its head and utilized a traditional architectural process, but we wouldn't have hit the developer's pro forma or their budget or their structure or their timeline. And if we look at the energy consumption of a standard building relative to Evolve 1, notice we were greatly reducing the lighting power, space heating and cooling, fan power, even service water heating. The plug loads are what they are because they're the same from one benchmark to the next. And the only thing that we increased the demand for energy for was pumping power because of our ground source heat pumps, which we'll talk about in a moment. So some things went up, but the majority of everything went down. And just in talking about energy use, when you get to this level of efficiency, you'll start to note that the plug loads become something that you need to manage because they're the highest load in the building, as opposed to a standard building where it's heating and cooling systems followed by lighting. We utilized a parametric design process to consider all the design options, all the budgetary constraints, so that we were working backwards from the bundles of strategies that worked to meet our goals and budgets. And I think the parametric design is amazing because it doesn't alleviate us the need to be creative, but it just makes sure that we're working with the factors in mind and can balance the complexity of projects. It won't tell you how tall to make your building. It won't tell you how wide to make your building. It can if you want to, but there are elements that it cannot replicate that you still need humans for. And so we arrived at 3 options, finalizing ourselves on the 3rd option here. And even though we needed a more extensive and expensive thermal envelope, what we liked about the HVAC system with the VRF central heat pump geo exchange was that it gave us the flexibility that we wanted and the ability to electrify. And so we were working again backwards from the goals and the budget on the solutions and bundles that got us to where we went to. And again, we still had to do some manual things like glazing selection, architectural design, color selections, sizing the PV array, etc. And there are a lot of HVAC systems and innovations and also off-the-shelf technologies that we incorporated into this building. And even though we were using parametric analysis to work backwards from the goals, we still had to undergo value engineering through the process. So again, it takes trained individuals, and the computers won't do it for you, but they're an aid to help you manage the complexity. So we didn't get our solar labyrinth, we didn't use displacement ventilation on the ground floor, we didn't get a living machine. We got most of what we wanted. So our conclusions are that space use and occupancy are critical. Maximize passive design first. Keep the building simple. Parametrics can handle complexity, but they won't replace the human, at least not yet. We need to electrify before 2050. We've got to control our plug loads through smart technologies and sensors. Form is flexible now, and as long as it's passive, mission-driven or developer-driven. Submeter and commissioning are critical. Maintaining PV cleanliness for optimization is important. Better envelopes equals simpler and eliminated MEP systems. And staying focused on holistic solutions is also important. So we can't just throw out everything for efficiency. We also have to think about health, resilience, durability, beauty, and inspiration. So with that, I hope to have inspired you and hope that you'll stay in touch. So thank you for your time and for having me at this wonderful event. Cheers.
Thanks very much there to Blake Jackson, who's Sustainability Design Leader at Stantec Architecture in Boston, Massachusetts. So there's been a slight change to the program schedule, but if I can just ask Azra to give some final thoughts, and then we'll start wrapping up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julian. It's been a very insightful and a power-packed session the last 2 days. We at CIBSE UAE have very successfully hosted the CIBSE UAE's first net zero virtual conference, which has essentially been aimed towards the general audience. And we've aimed to provide a knowledge-sharing, thought-provoking platform by engaging and gathering perspectives from various stakeholders across the value chain. So we've successfully learned about new trends in regulation, new trends in academia, and various evidence projects. And just to recap from day one, yesterday, which was the UAE context, which is focused towards the UAE context, we've gathered perspectives from the Emirates Green Building Council, which quite eloquently addressed the climate change dialogue by pioneering various programs here in the UAE in the past few years that are directed towards net zero development, mainly their associations with ILFI and their recent publications on defining near zero buildings across the UAE and playing a pivotal role in creating a knowledge base and a research and development hub for various entities across the value chain, for contractors, developers, and consultants, primarily because the built environment contributes substantially to the local and global emissions. We're talking about 70% energy emission, 70% emissions from the built environment. And we see a lot of good work that's being conducted by the Emirates Green Building Council. And they've sort of set the stage for innovation and dialogue. And we've seen from yesterday, we've seen a lot of contribution from the private sector as well, like Johan from Multiplex, who provided us some insights on the contractor's perspective in meeting the climate change emergency act and the net zero goals, and how he quite clearly mentioned that it is a collaborative approach, and he gave us a lot more granular insights of implementing various strategies like involving design and build strategies for new developments, so that it closes the gap between the design intent and the construction intent of a particular building property. So very good insights, and that sort of segues towards the academic research that was presented by Inas, who's representing the British University of Dubai, and how she highlighted the possibilities and the vision for retrofitting existing building stock across the UAE by gathering active and passive measures, and how the role of solar plays a pivotal role, and making some clear differences between monocrystalline and polycrystalline PV panels, and how that's effective in terms of building design, which gives a very clear idea for end users from a non-technical background to be empowered to design buildings more effectively and to make more informed decisions. And that's how we see our future moving forward, is that we have more generalists who can take more informed decisions in terms of being climate conscious and embracing the new normal. Obviously there's been substantial contribution by our developers, property developers like Diamond Developers and Majid Al Futtaim, who are taking, who are literally on the forefront of sustainability here in the UAE by presenting various strategies of how they're meeting their net zero goals by implementing net zero at a community level. It was great to learn insights on.
Azra, 2 minutes.
Yes, of course. So to quickly wrap up, yes, the day 2 of our conference has been very rewarding because we've had perspectives from the World Green Building Council. As Victoria very rightly mentioned, there's a need for collaboration. There's no one party responsible. We all work together, and it's across different value chains, and it's across by the use of various rating systems and methodologies, we can accomplish our climate change goals and drive government authorities to then in turn drive the private sector. So it works as a two-way stream. And finally, very interesting projects from Isabel Architecture from Australia, all the way from Australia, about meeting sustainability design goals that integrates well-being and internal comfort to provide a more holistic living environment for buildings of the future. And closing off with Blake Jackson's very interesting insight on implementing a minimalistic design philosophy and following a hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle, and staying true to that mantra of basically looking at the building envelope, looking at how we can reduce our energy consumption by looking at our passive measures, by adding shading elements to our exterior wall, window to wall ratios, improving the insulation, to then actively looking at investing in renewables. And that's how we can come closer to achieving our net zero goals and achieving the net zero energy utilization index. So with that, I'd like to wrap up today's session, and I'd like to pass on the floor to Farah Naz to give her final comments and close today's session. Thank you all for attending the session for today, and we hope that we can continue the dialogue for the coming months and coming quarters. So Farah Naz, please, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Azra. Thank you everyone for being here today with us for 2 days, and those of you joined us today. I think the key takeaway for me is that globally there is quite a bit happening. But if we look at the timeline that's set by World Green Building Council of today, we have 2020 to 2030, 10 years, to actually look at climate emergency and to reduce the temperature by 1.5 degrees C. And as mentioned several times, that our built environment is sorry, I'm just getting too many messages, work calls, apologies. Our built environment is responsible for 40% of global emission. So my last thoughts and the key takeaway for this conversation today is that in UAE, we really need policy level drivers to drive climate emergency and to drive net zero decarbonization pathways. We are doing okay, but we need to have very clear, stringent pathways set to meet UAE's 2030 and 2050 goal. In 2018, World Green Building Council has set up a commitment for net zero buildings. It's called Net Zero Carbon Building Commitment. And as per this commitment, by 2030, all new buildings needs to be net zero. And by 2050, all buildings, that means existing and new buildings. I think as built environment professionals, especially working in UAE and looking at all the case studies and the lessons learned that we got from the industry for the last 2 days, I think we really need to be reflective and ask the question and be more proactive in really questioning and inspiring and also informing and educating the clients to actually move towards a more zero carbon and decarbonization. Finally, impact investment and financials are becoming a big conversation globally. So finance is something, and we touched on this today and yesterday. So this is something we really need to be, as a consultant, as an academia, we really need to be having these conversations. How do we make sustainability more financially feasible? What is the business case? And what I see is that in the next 5 or 10 years, the ESG conversation that's happening globally is actually going to merge with net zero conversation. And lastly, the final thought that we always ask is, do we have enough skill sets? Are our engineers prepared? Is the mid-career level engineers prepared? Are our educators doing enough to move this agenda? So I think we all have a responsibility towards this. It's not just academia, or it's not just us as consultant. I think we all need to work together to co-create, to actually collaborate and challenge each other to really find the pathway. So I hope this conversation doesn't end here. Next week, RIBA Gulf is holding quite a bit of conversation on net zero. So I would invite all our speakers to attend those conversations. It's related to Gulf, but I think these conversations needs to be constantly happening. And this is how we will educate each other, create awareness, and move towards a future that we can all be proud of. So thank you again for all the attendees to be with us today, all the panelists and speakers for giving us your time and commitment and sharing your knowledge. And a big thank goes to our moderator, Azra Hussein, and then our MC, Julian. Julian, off to you.
Thank you, Azra. Nicely wrapped up there, and some thought-provoking comments. Just before everyone leaves, I did just want to obviously do my job as a CIBSE membership representative. So I will just share some quick slides, but I won't keep you too long, because obviously we're coming towards the end. So that's not working. So just quickly, some of the benefits of CIBSE membership if you aren't already a member. Obviously our knowledge portal has a wealth of information. There's the CIBSE journal, there's CPD and networking. Our membership grades range from entry-level grades such as student, graduate and affiliate, through to those corporate grades, which mean you get some professional recognition for your experience and qualifications. And they also come with engineering council registration, so you can end up becoming an EngTech engineer, an iEng engineer, or a chartered engineer. I'll skip through that quickly because I'm sure you're all aware of the benefits of professional registration. We also have society memberships, and I know some of you are members of Society of Public Health, Engineering and Lighting, but we have grades of membership as well for those specialist areas. Digital engineering is something that we're pushing quite a lot now as well. Our groups are very active, so we have very specialist groups that do some incredible work and publish guides and hold events. We have an energy performance group, which you may be interested in joining. They're actually free to join, so I really encourage all to join some of those groups. There's building simulation, intelligent buildings, and a school design, actually, so something that's quite relevant, that was quite relevant to today. Next, coming up in CIBSE UAE, we're actually having the annual awards. Normally the dinner and awards would take place in a swanky hotel in Dubai. Obviously that can't be done, but ordinarily in an ordinary year, that's what would be happening. So there's presentations monthly, if not more often than that, actually. Technical events, and so definitely worth getting involved. And if you'd like to join the CIBSE UAE Awards as a spectator for the ceremony, it's an online ceremony, so it'll be open to all. I know that entries have been really, really positive. It's cibse.org/UAE Awards. And finally, if you'd like any support in applying for CIBSE membership or one of the society grades of memberships, please get in touch. And I'll leave my contact details there at the end. So that's all I wanted to say. And thanks to all of you who are still on the call. And I'm guessing we can say goodbye.
Next up, we have Sergio Salava. Sergio is a mechanical lead, and he's a representative of Stantec in Seattle, Washington. Sergio will be speaking about a Seattle project currently under construction that is designed to comply with Seattle Green Building Council and the Seattle's Living Building pilot program. This program is comprised of innovative water solutions using integrated piping for cooling using domestic water systems. So I'll hand over to Sergio. Thank you.
303 Battery Project is a 15-story tall building with 112 residential units, out of which 27 are reserved for affordable housing. The site doesn't have any on-site parking and is complying with the Living Building pilot program for the city of Seattle. I will explain to you in a minute what that means. 303 Battery Project is basically an evolution from 47724 apartments project that we designed with Collins Warman Architecture a few years ago, and is located in the UW district here in Seattle. Incorporates a modular construction by SLI, Sustainable Living Innovations, that own a factory where all the modules are being basically manufactured in the south of Seattle in Tacoma, Washington State. 477 incorporated a solar thermal array on the south facade, as you can see here on the top of the slide. The apartments incorporated in-floor radiant heating solution, but no provisions for comfort cooling. So the client requested us to incorporate comfort cooling provisions or a fan coil on the units in order to be able to transfer this design to other climate zones in the US. However, there was some restrictions imposed to us. One is that we have to live within the wall panel, which currently we are using to distribute ductwork for ventilation. As you can see in this diagram, it has to have at least a half a ton or 1.8 kilowatt capacity, and it has to be quiet operation since it's a residential use. We work with Williams to develop this low pressure, low noise fan coil unit. And you can see here on the picture how end up with the cover that the interior designer chose to use. But the most important thing was that the two-pipe coil was low pressure, and therefore we can make it work for the half a ton with 4 CPU-like exhaust fans that therefore they can move in a very quiet operation. The city of Seattle has this incentive program for developers to create high performance projects. And one is the Living Building pilot. And the idea here is that if you are able to achieve the performance, they allow you to build up to 30% more floor area and give you an additional height for your FAR on the 7.7 meters, which we managed to get we managed to get 3 floors in addition to the original 12. And that's why we have 15 stories. Now that is a big incentive for developers to go beyond the traditional design for residential buildings. The carrot was additional FAR, but the stick is basically that the project needs to achieve full living building challenge certification, or at least energy petal certification. Now, in addition to that, you have to not use potable water for non-potable water uses, whether it's irrigation or flushing toilets. So in order to comply with the program, we need to integrate a greywater system treatment plant. We did this with a skid-mounted, self-contained 1,500 gallons per day of potential treatment. But we know, because Seattle is in the Pacific Northwest and we have a large amount of rainfall during the year, that this system will actually be able to provide more than 30% of the annual daily demands of the project. The other requirement for the pilot program was to achieve a 25% reduction from the target performance path CRG code compliance. Now, we know this being a residential project, we have to be lower than 35 kBTU per square foot, or equivalent to 110 kWh per square meter. The typical split for this target performance path, 35 kBTU per square foot, is with 30% is being consumed by domestic hot water, 27% by space heating, and 11% by fans, and 8% by the interior lighting. So the team wanted to focus on those specific areas to make this reduction. Based on the modular nature and the original design for these modules, we decided to left out the interior lighting and focus these particular 3 areas where we could achieve that 25% savings request by the city. Lean Mean Green is the methodology that Stantec we use for performance-based projects, and is a way of achieving this reduction of energy and increased performance. Now, because this project was modular and we already optimized the ceilings, floors, and walls, and even the specification of the glass, there was not a lot for us to do within the lean portion of the project. And we focused a lot on the mean, and basically how we're going to be treating that load that we already reduced through the lean process earlier on, and making very efficient the heating mechanical systems. So that's what I'm going to explain now. One of the restrictions of the Living Building Challenge is not for the building to burn any fossil fuels for domestic hot water or for space heating. And with the implementation of the greywater system, we decided to go almost straight away to a wastewater heat recovery heat pump. Now, these heat pumps are very efficient with a COP of 8.5, but they have a limitation on how hot they can produce the water. Now, it's about 49 degrees C, and it can only really, if you just link it to the greywater system, to produce about 80% of the daily demand. Therefore, we had to supplement that wastewater heat recovery heat pump with an air source heat pump to do, to top up the temperature from the 49 degrees C to 60 degrees for Legionella control, but also to have enough capacity that the greywater system cannot produce. And therefore, we have now about 150, 160% of overall capacity within the building on these heat recovery heat pumps. These heat pumps were connected to the integrated piping system, where the domestic cold water supply is used to serve the fungal units that we discussed. Now, we are doing this because the temperature profile of the incoming water from the utility is more or less constant over all the year at a 9 degrees centigrade. Now, this has enough cooling capacity for us to apply some comfort cooling, since Pacific Northwest, this region in the US, doesn't have very hot or humid climate. Now, I understand that this is not true in the UAE, and probably the supply temperature of DIWA, even in winter, is going to be somewhere around the 20-something centigrades, and therefore there's no really capacity for you. But here, having that opportunity to gain and extract some heat out of, or some cool out of the domestic hot water, will allow us to provide that perceived luxury aspect of having cooling without having to spend a lot of energy in the production of cooling demands or use a heat pump or a chiller. At the end, the water cycle for 303 battery is not a traditional linear intake-discharge process, but makes the potable and domestic water an intrinsic part of the overall project energy efficiency. We use it for carry, cool, and heating, and then once we insert the heat, we recover it before we treat it for a gray water system and use that water for flushing before it gets discharged as a black water into the sewage. After we have squeezed as much as possible efficiency out of the mechanical systems, we can focus now on the energy harvesting and renewables, which is the green part of the design methodology I'm explaining, lean, mean, green. Initially, as per the project 477, it was thought to have a solar thermal collector array within the project, but the heat pumps are so efficient and the power production is more flexible that the team decided to use a PV array instead. The on-site array, it provides around 45% of the annual energy demand on site. This array is located in 3 major locations: the rooftop area, the eastern facade in vertical position, and also the western orientated units integrated within the balconies. We have about 260 panels for a total peak capacity production of electricity of 100 kilowatts. Unfortunately, this site is located in an area where the Seattle City Lights grid cannot accept exporting of power, and therefore we cannot use the grid, which is very typical in other net zero projects, as a virtual battery. And in order to harvest as much as possible power during the summertime, which exceed the demand on the site, we have an array of batteries in the basement. On-site array, PV array for 303 battery was not enough to produce the 100% energy demands. And to comply with the energy petal for the International Living Future Institute, we needed to invest and create a dedicated PV farm somewhere else. The owner decided to invest in the rooftop of the Sustainable Living Innovations Factory, which are creating the modules for construction of this project. And therefore, they created a PV farm of about 0.5 megawatt peak production with somewhere about 1,400 panels. These panels, and this array is in a good location where the grid actually can accept the electrons. So we have just a direct connection to the utility, and we are exporting every single kilowatt hour producing. And that is accounted for around 67% of the energy demand of the project. And therefore, we are in compliance with the International Living Future Institute and the demands for the energy petal. To understand all the performance of these design features that we have integrated within the project, and also to be able to compare with the target performance path by the Seattle Energy Code requirements, we model this project in IES virtual environment. We incorporated all the passive systems like natural ventilation, the automatic roller shades, occupancy sensors, and also day lighting controls for the interior lighting that are already part of the project. Now that provides us an EUI that we can compare with the target that the city imposed on us, that it was 25% reduction from that 35 kBTUs per square foot or 110 kWh per square meter. The Seattle Energy Code allows us to use only the on-site production of renewables to comply with the target performance path. That is a difference with the International Living Future Institute for the energy petal, but that's what we agreed to use. The estimated performance of the project is 26 kBTU per square foot or 81.4 kilowatt hour per square meter, which is in compliance with the Seattle Energy Code 2015 target performance path and the Living Building pilot program. wrap up this presentation, I just would like to say that there is not like one technology you can apply and it will get you to the net zero energy performance, but it's more like a method of designing and integrated different energy conservation measures that will be and will help you getting there. Now, you need an architect to go with you and also a committed developer or owner. In this particular project, we have an enhanced performance for the facade, also active systems for controls like natural ventilation or daylighting, occupancy, and also an app that we have developed to let the occupants know whether it's a good time to open the window or put the laundry in order to consume energy that's been harvested and that peak time instead of trying to put it into the battery system. Now we have in-radiant heating, we have the wastewater heat recovery systems, and very efficient overall, mechanical systems that helps. And, to wrap it up, also we have the PV array on site. But I think the most important thing is that we have learned some of these technologies, how to apply them so we can move forward to the next project. And that's what we are doing. Right now, Collins Warman, SLI, and us, Stantec, we are looking at applying these lessons learned to another project very similar to 303 battery in California. And that is basically the whole intent, is that to create and transform the market through good design and examples that are replicable and transferable from one market to another. And this completes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm very grateful for the CIBSE UAE chapter to allow me to present this project that I'm so excited about. And since this is being pre-recorded, there's no opportunity for you to really interact with me, but I'm very happy for you to, to send you my, an email and communicate with me. We can discuss about the opportunities and challenges of this project or any other, projects or applications that you have used. Again, thank you very much for your time. Shukran.